there's only one there.
Yeah, nothing like that.
Or
All right, it's 10 o'clock, we're gonna get started.
come on.
Everyone's got their agenda. First thing, we recognize that there's a lot of things on today's list, so we're going to take the disc update out so that we can continue to expedite through
I'm
that.
just gonna do a little bit of some, and Ange will come down and do some of it. but-
Okay. Okay, thank you. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Jenna.
Yeah, thanks a lot for participating in doing it. We try to do these annual planning meetings, we did our retreat, March 19th, we did our retreat. It was good, setting the tone, or setting the direction and the focus areas that you provided us. We, have a full schedule today going through, kind of where we left off on the 19th, and then how we're moving forward, which will then forward us into the 2027 budget spring. But I just want to make sure I introduce Jody Hirschheim. She's from Agile. Everybody maybe met her either on the street somewhere, but in person. And then we have Dan from Elders too up here too to help us with it. And then hopefully you know everybody else, otherwise we're in trouble. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Emily to get us kicked off here.
All right, so I thought, or Jenna and I thought it would be good to start our conversation today with just a review from the March 19th strategic planning session. So I know the director team has discussed part of this, but just to share kind of a very high level overview, as now that we're all together, good way to start off our day. So, again, Jenna and I met with all of the city council on March 19th to kick off that strategic planning process. And
The mics are not on, do we know that?
They're not on.
They're not on, can you guys hear out there? You're good? Okay. Sorry, just wanted to see, you guys get your back there.
all right, so, our day on the 19th, we talked about, the role of council and how important it is for our elected officials to really set the vision for, the city of Owatonna, and the role of staff then to execute that vision. So, as our day progressed, we talked about this, and use the funnel as a visual. So we really started our conversation kind of at the widest part of the funnel, talking about what's the picture of the future. So spent some time discussing 5+ years out, what would success or a better tomorrow look like for our community. And then we narrowed it down a little bit further and talked about some strategic objectives or focus areas. So those based on maybe the 3-year time frame. And then, the most narrow part of the funnel, we talked about outcomes. So in the next 3 years, what are the top 3 objectives that council really wants to see us achieve? That is then where council's role stops, and then we pass the baton to staff members. So staff will now work, moving forward to talk about action plans and projects and how are we going to execute this in order to achieve those outcomes. Again, this is kind of a somewhat comical way to talk about the role of council. We talked about nose in, fingers out. So it is staff's role to do the work and execute that vision. It's council's role to really set that vision for us, so we know what direction to go. So nose in, fingers out. We also spent some time talking about
Okay,
civility.
Emily, can we go back to the one funnel slide, just to remember, we'll get down to it, but when we were talking about that 5-year, Kent had said, this is when you're sitting reading your newspaper in 5 years, what does those look like? We'll go through some of that, and then did our post-it notes. And then we had those kind of directives for myself of what do you asking staff to go get after the next couple of years. So, we'll see this come through again, but I think it's important for staff to learn at that point, to make sure that you understand kind of what those increments were and why and what that looked like. So, sure, thank you.
So we talked about civility and really working together as a united team. So civility, encompasses more than just good manners and etiquette. It talks about how we actually do our work. So obviously, the city's purpose and values guide the work that we do. We create a better tomorrow, that's our why, but how we do that is through our values. And I think spending some time just setting the stage and having that discussion on civility just keeps us on the same page moving forward as one united team. Civility and incivility, it can have different definitions or mean something different to each individual person, right? So on the 19th, we spent some time talking about how do we want to define that to lead the city of Owatonna. And out of that conversation, this civility code was developed. And this civility code is now printed and kept up at the dais as a consistent reminder. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but the high level themes are listening with the intent to understand, that commitment to better together and our shared why, promise to remain open-minded and open to others' perspectives and to lead with empathy, and a promise to stand in unity. So when decisions are made, support the team, respect and honor the outcome, even when it differs from our personal perspectives, we move forward as one. And I think that is critically important in our discussion today, making sure that we, as staff and as council, are all moving forward as one.
If I might,
Yeah.
from the perspective of those of us that sit in the elected chairs, the work that we do to set that direction, to pass it on to staff, you can't overemphasize the unity part of it, and that once we do make those decisions, that we do respect and honor them. When there's disunity amongst the decision makers, that shows in the way that staff executes that vision. And if there are voices speaking out against a decision that was made, personally, you're not going to be able to agree with every single one. But when we decide that this is what we believe is best for the city moving forward, I think it's something that we need to keep in mind in particular and respect that decision as we pass it on to staff, because they're going to do their best with the advice and decisions that have been made up here. But if there's disunity after that decision is made, it just creates chaos. So that would be my ask, that we keep that in mind as well.
That's a good point, Mayor. Everybody that was at the retreat made a promise,
Right.
right? Like, this is for words and not for promise to each other. So, thank you.
Okay, so here's that funnel again. So now we'll talk through in a little bit more detail each step of that process. And council, I invite you to jump in on the conversation if I missed something, or if we didn't capture the conversation accurately, please feel free to jump in. So we'll start with the picture of the future. So this was part of our conversation. So when we thought about, 5+ years from now, what do we want to see? What would that perfect future look like for the city of Owatonna? These were some of the bullet points that came up in our conversation. Thriving, growing community, vibrant and alive downtown, recognized as a regional hub and a standard of excellence with other communities looking to us as a model of what's possible. Strong, proactive financial stewardship, ensuring long-term stability and solid financial foundation. Our citizens are engaged, informed, and confident. They value transparency, trust our leadership, and believe in the direction that we're heading. And we've built a sustainable future, one grounded in excellence, financial strength, and clear, forward-looking plan. What did I miss? Does anybody have questions?
But this was a fun exercise, right? This is where we got to like be real proud of the hard work we're probably doing today that will be reflected by yourselves. Thoughts on this one? Okay.
All right, so then when we go to the next step of the funnel, we talked about, okay, of that perfect future, what would those focus areas be? So this was a little bit more refined, right? And we're thinking maybe 3 to 5 years, what would these focus areas be? Financial stewardship came to the top of the list. Community education came to the top of the list. Growth and development, and leadership and talent development.
You guys have seen this, our directors have seen it once, twice maybe. We get into these focus areas, and some of the work we're doing today is leading into these areas. But the title has way more to it than just the title, right? I mean, financial stewardship, we're in that today, we're talking a lot about that, how we do it. The community education and transparency, I think we know clearly we need to engage and do outreach with our community, probably more than we have. So making an intentional effort on saying that and saying it out there as a focus area. And then community growth and development. Again, we talk about what makes it easy for someone to come in and want to do business with us. We have to have a set up for that, work with that. And then our leadership and our development. And that's just not the leaders of our directors, but it's also our leaders in council. The next time, we get new council members on here, how to best set them up for success too. And making sure people that are wanting to serve in these seats are really part of being prepared to be able to make those decisions and have those conversations. And then, of course, it's across our whole organization, so it's not just the directors, but making sure our leadership and our staff are developed, trained, and that cross-trained, I think, is very important.
The intention behind that,
Are we able to dig into these right now, or do we wanna get through this and get back?
Well, on the next one down is kind of where we're starting to get some meat on the bone, is where we're at today. So, but you can add these pieces, this is conversation.
Oh. Well, I see the second one has always been I've said 100 times, the more ways we have to communicate to people, the fewer people hear. And if you had every social media thing covered, every newspaper, and every website, you'd still run into somebody that says, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. So, do we have a master plan for somehow to just throw information at people so somebody hears?
That's a
That
$1
question
million
makes
question.
sense.
I mean, I don't have an answer to that, Doug,
Yeah.
like, what is the one way or 2 ways I would do it, or 100 ways to do it, but I think we just need to continue to do better and try harder and continue to shift and understand. I think when we get task force put together, it's important to get different generations with different perspectives on that, so we make sure that we're getting all. I don't think there is one way.
It's just,
Were you done?
I was gonna say, I mean, communication obviously is a two-way street, so somehow you gotta get people to buy in, to wanna listen. How do we do that?
And we can't force people to be engaged. Yeah, but sometimes it's one of those things that you don't know what you don't know. And I think too often we're running into that. I think we do generally a pretty good job of getting the message out there. We use a lot of different venues. Are there more? Sure, there probably are. And always looking for those is a great thing. But in that respect, that's kind of a thing where we don't know what we don't know, and if we do, we can use
council to do their job, and so they trust that. And so I think that's sometimes why we don't see people as engaged as, you know, they're busy people.
Sure, absolutely.
But I feel like if they wanna know, there's information, they're transparent, but I feel like we have a better opportunity to connect with people and build some of that connection where we have something else. So that's what I hope.
I guess I'll kind of piggyback on Doug's comments. The elephant in the room is transparency. That's the word the whole country is using now. And it's kind of a bugaboo for us currently. We're being blamed for not being transparent enough. Across the country, they're streaming small city councils and saying, hey, we want to know why that decision was made. They're not putting their trust in councils or legislators or the White House. So I think that's our biggest battle right now. And like the mayor said, we could post what we're doing on 5 different apps. We're still gonna say it's not enough. Kind of like last night, people will complain, why do you go on the siren so often? The next person will say, you didn't blow it up. Can't get it.
But we'll do our best and try to do that.
Yeah, and, you know, you being at the top position, you're seeing it the most and having to deal with it. 60-hour weeks, and so.
This is our tech, we're the people's business, right? So it's.
And I don't know where that all comes from. They want to see what's going on behind the curtain. They think it's not right.
Transparency is a word that's, what's everyone's definition of transparency? Well, it was in the paper. Well, I don't subscribe to the paper. Well, it was on Cows Radio. Well, I listen to Sirius XM. Well, it was here. Well, I don't do that. The transparency is there. You just, the customer is looking at those venues, listening to those venues, reading those venues. And we can't force people to buy the paper, but if you listen to the radio, that's free. And so, you know, the argument about transparency doesn't really carry a lot of water, because the messaging is out there. It's just because you choose not to read the paper or listen to a radio doesn't mean it wasn't transparent. You just didn't do the venues to bids, you know, along with website and everything else.
They're getting most of their information at the grocery store. They don't need anything else. Or.
I do think though, you know, go back to the survey that was conducted in November. You know, I don't have it in front of me, but I think, you know, in that showed people trust what you're doing. So, I mean, again, we always can do better. But I think from that survey, the feedback that came through was that people trusted our council and wanted to keep doing what we're doing. It was favorable about that. So, anyways, just, I think it's, you know, we do have some resources that tell us kind of test that. Anything from staff on this one?
Okay. All right, so, these were the outcomes that we landed on at the end of our time together. So, these are the outcomes that council has said in the next 3 years, they would like staff to develop a plan to achieve these. The top of the list was public safety infrastructure. Second on the list was organizational effectiveness. So really, implement and optimize staffing and organizational structure that aligns resources with priorities, improves efficiencies, and supports sustainable service delivery. And then manage community growth. Owatonna's been very fortunate to have steady growth, and we want that to continue. But we also want to ensure that growth is intentional, balanced, and supported by infrastructure services and community needs. So really making sure that we're taking that big picture approach to growth. Comments, questions, additional clarity?
On the community growth, you hear people, well, we're not doing, we're shrinking. We continue to build houses, we continue to build apartments, the apartments are full before they're built. Councilmember Bloss said that the new apartment, they've already got, leases ready to go, and that's not close to being finished yet. And so it's a misnomer to say that Old Town is not, when we look at the census numbers, Old Town continues to grow well. Some of our neighbors are stagnant or even losing population, so.
And these topics are pretty heavy loaded, I mean, it's not just one piece underneath it, different visions or focus areas of what that might look like and what it means, but this is really our work that we want to focus on, here this year, next year, and upcoming years. So as we're starting to build these plans out, this is what we're trying to focus, what does this look like? And then if I share that our work plan will focus around this, that means our work plan, we meet with the director's work plan coming forward and saying, here's what we can do to start moving some of those forward. And I think it touches every department, no matter which area you're in. I think it touches all of our departments, so it's not just one department that we're talking about, community growth, like it's everybody's responsibility. So,
No question. The second one, organizational effectiveness. I know that's, things that we're not involved with for the most part, but I guess my question is staff and everybody giving you feedback as you've been through this whole process, you know, Emily? Or who's involved in that process?
all of us, right? Like it's staff, it's not only the top staff, the department heads, but all the way through. Like this is what really is starting to get moving. But when you get to organizational effectiveness, we talk about this all the time, staff or at department or at the council too, it's that, how do we sustain this? And I took over this job, my motto became, how do we build it for the future? Right? How do we build it bigger than us? So when Jenna steps away, it's not, oh my gosh, Jenna left, but there's somebody there to go. I have to tap out, there's that sustainability, that we're not burning people out, that one person's working way harder than another, or whatever. But we have that balance, but we have that sustainable approach. And if we're trying to grow, like how to keep up with that too, even with some more staffing. And you'll see that in our financial management plan, like this, how we're starting to put that in there. What does balance look like? What does growth look like? How do we maintain it? How do we keep people balance on their
I make the comment though that, don't be afraid to think it's something different. Just because we've had all this set up department heads for 30 years, doesn't mean it has to be there next year. We've got lots of really smart people here, maybe there's a better way to do some of this stuff. And as long as we're taking big swings, let's do that too.
I like that idea that focus to do that, to go, should we do something the way we are doing it today, we do it to the future, I guess. One of that, and to that point is, do we have the right organization structure? You know, I've chatted a little bit with council on this, just what does our organization structure look like to get success for the future? How would we set ourselves up for that? What does that look like? So we're testing that a little bit of saying, what does that look like? How one might do it differently to be able to get to this 3-year, 5-year, 7-year outlook. So maybe it's the same, but at least we want to test it to say, this is the right structure, we have people in the right areas to move this forward.
We've had those conversations at the department director team as well. So, to your point, yes, we are having those conversations as well. The comment I'd like to make about the organizational.
Hey, Emily, I think.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
no, go ahead, Emily, I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I was just going to say, when it comes to organizational effectiveness, as important as it is for employee recruitment and retention to optimize staffing, provide staff development, I would like to say yes, and the outcome that we're looking for is really that uninterrupted, excellent level of service for our community. So as important as those pieces are for our staff members, it is also very important for our community. We're in the service industry, we don't take that responsibility lightly. And our goal is to provide that high level of service uninterrupted for our community members. So working on these things and developing that bench and building it bigger than us will help us create some resiliency for that high level of service work.
This might not be the right time to ask this question, but.
I'll
this is-
let you know if it's not.
Okay. I usually get told that at home too, so I know that. We're building this thought from a high level perspective. I had a mentor that told me those closest to the work know the most about it. Staff, are you buying into this, or is this just BS? Because if you don't buy into it, you can have the greatest scenario of where we're headed to. If it's not being bought into, it's not gonna go anywhere. So I'm gonna put that on you guys. You buying in, or is this BS?
If I can answer.
Well,
Just
they have-
remember, we're not your bosses, gee, so you can.
Yeah, what are you guys buying in or not? Nice head nod.
I'm buying it.
I
And I
see a
think
lot
we
of.
did a good job of talking to all staff about like these big projects and stuff that we're working on. That transparency has really improved over the last couple of years, so it's not just about at our level, we're hearing from every level of the organization and every kind of.
Because to hit the point of my mentor saying, hey, it's the guy that's on the floor sweeping the floor, is he buying into it? I mean, are your folks gonna buy into this, or is this something we're just putting something into the community and saying, hey, we got this deal, but it doesn't happen? Okay, Sean, you're smiling, you gotta answer the question. You know how that goes, you know, or you get somebody, your professor looks at you and sees the guy doing this and doing that, and you get, so again, this is important to us. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on this, we're thinking it's gonna grow. If you don't buy in, and your folks don't buy in, we're completely dead in the water.
It's a good question. There can be a lot of discussion on it, but I think at the end of the day, what you have to look at is that we're elected by our citizens, and this is what our citizens want. We're here to serve. So if we're not gonna buy into the plan, we shouldn't be here. If we're all here, so we're gonna buy into the plan, because that's what our community wants.
Brian, what do you think?
I think that was all stated. I think too, you're gonna have people that look at everything a little bit differently. And that's okay, because I think there should be some discussion, push back, make sure it's the right thing. Buy-in will come with a clear direction from council. I think if council is all on board and saying the same message, that will trickle down.
Others, comments? Come on, Brian.
Well, I don't think it's a new concept. I think, I mean, I've been here a long time. I think we've always strived for, effective, keep more effective. It might be little changes, it might be bigger changes. I think we're always looking to be better. So the concept, I don't think is different than what we've always done. Now, the implementation on some of those might be a little different. But, I mean, if I speak for my staff, I mean, we're always looking for ways to be more efficient. And so I think we'll have a meeting running that, so.
I got a thumbs up over here, so assuming you're good.
Right, yep, and I think right now we're in a place where Troy kind of hit it right. These are things that are not new concepts, but the atmosphere and the leadership now, I think, are really leaning into a lot of these, and I think there's some real intentional, thoughtful conversations going on around these topics that will hopefully show some really positive outcomes, so I'm excited.
I'm not gonna, just because you guys are off to the side, chiefs, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, it goes with trusted leadership. You know, our staff that works below, all our directors, trust our leadership. And I feel like we come with confidence, but it goes back to our original conversation about civility. We have to lead the community across the board. And we recognize that these things may change and they're massaged over the years and our priorities may change, but, we have to be one unified group. And I think, all these outcomes, our goals for these next few years will come with a price tag. We have to recognize that. We have to understand what that is. And to do this, we need staff. These are highly staff-driven initiatives. And we need staff to meet these goals. And so as we do in our strategic planning, we'll deliver our recommendations. We'll probably have some hard conversations on what that's gonna look like and how we're gonna achieve it, but I think it starts with the leadership here and focusing on our objectives and outcomes.
All right. So for the fire side, we're in an interesting spot. Because right now we're waiting on that new chief one, and so I can tell you that I believe we absolutely believe in, being on the same page. And it does come back to, as a council, if council's all headed in the right direction and they're all supporting one goal, believe in firefighters, we go, great, now what can we do and what's our direction on what we can, how do we help accomplish that? Getting that new chief one in place and kind of bringing a clear, unified department together is what we're all about. Believe me, we are aiming for that, but I would love to support what Chief said, that going forward, it's gonna take more people. It's gonna take a new facility. So I believe in our goals. Super.
Since I paid Kelly for 3 questions, she said I had to pay $2 a question.
Oh, nice.
The only other comment I was gonna make is, when we were at our retreat, we talked about, am I committed to this, or am I promising this? There was a section I was mentioned to him, well, I'm committed to this, and he goes, no, you promise. When you promise something, you're gonna do it. And when I'm committed to it, so again, you're gonna hold us accountable to promise to do what we're saying we're gonna do, and Jenna's gonna hold you accountable to the promise. So going forward, we need to be all in lockstep moving forward together. And we as a council promise to do what we say we're gonna do. So, here's my $6 worth of stuff.
$4.99 I prefer. Not a discount yet, but
But I can't give you a penny back, they're gone now, so I'll have to give you a nickel back.
So I've got a question for Chief Monday. We're talking about public safety and infrastructure, and in that is fully operational and staffed. So my question is, at the last council meeting, we got an update on the Axon. And I happened to run into the 2 police officers at the high school the next day. And I said it was a fantastic, how we saw the pluses of the Axon system. And they couldn't speak highly enough, and very appreciative of making sure that stayed in the budget. When we're talking about staffing, and we all recognize that finding police officers is just an ongoing thing. With us being able to expedite the paperwork, does that kind of assist a little bit in maybe not being as staffed as we were optimal? Or it's, it does some things, but it's still a bigger challenge than we recognize.
Yeah, I would agree. It does some things. These efficiencies certainly are true with Axon products because it is producing an officer's police report faster, so that means that the officer can run the street sooner. The problem that it doesn't fix is we still need minimum staffing levels to, number one, provide a service to the community, and number two, provide safety to a fellow officer. We can't be sending officers out on 911 domestics, stabbing, shooting calls alone. So the Axon product that gets the work done faster, I still need staff to to safely respond and protect our community and each other.
And as we look at the population goals, every time we reach a certain population, that the national averages kick in, hey, now that you're at this number of population, you need to have X number of officers. Is that 30,000? Does that bring that number up again?
I would say yes, it does, and each year through budgeting, I've always been asking, since I've been the chief since 2022, I've always been asking for one more officer, just to kind of keep chipping away so we can do more. So the thing to consider here is, I actually will technically lose some staffing because we assigned 2 officers to the school district. So I'm really short 2, even though they're providing a service and safety to the school, those are 2 officers that I don't have for emergency calls. The other point is, we have officers assigned, it's an undercover agents to the drug task force, so I lose staff there. So when you look at my budgeted allocated strength, I'm actually short 3, technically, because of those specialty assignments where we have those officers assigned elsewhere in our community or our region. So as this community continues to grow and more housing is added, and the city's, long-range planning, I'm gonna continue to need more officers. The other important thing about law enforcement is when you do the same position over the course of a career, 30 years, these officers need change. They need the opportunity to develop and change within the role. It helps with succession planning and development. So having an officer push a squad for 20 plus years, they need something new and different and to develop themselves. So for example, like we'll have an assignment to the detective bureau, or a school resource officer, drug task force, and then there's specialty assignments within those divisions, such as use of force, defense tactics, drones, canine, SWAT, all those things, but still the core function comes back to their main job description or job duty, such as a patrol officer, sergeant. But when you see a promotion here, you might have anywhere from 5 to 15 years on, and you see a promotion to sergeant. Well, that position is really, you're pretty much stagnant in that position until there's another opportunity. These opportunities don't come around so often because we do have longevity of staff, and they occupy these positions for years. So by adding staff, it gives the chief a little bit more flexibility to be assigning people to these specialty assignments without impacting minimum staff levels. So right now, we're at a point where I don't have enough staff to make a promotion to sergeant. Sergeant Matichak just retired, and I have to withhold that promotion until I can boost up staffing levels in the patrol division to support that. Otherwise, what's going to suffer? The service to the community is going to suffer, morale could suffer, health, wellness, because officers are working, they could potentially be burnt out, they're working more and more hours. So I think, whether council knows this or not, under Chris Boosie's leadership and under Janice Tuma leadership, we are able to hire above minimum, or we were able to hire above allocated budgeted strength. Number 1, through salary savings, but number 2, it provided a little bit of a buffer. And that buffer could mean because we have an injury, family medical leave, Minnesota paid leave, PTO, comp time, personal benefit. So looking at all that staff development training, we actually need more officers to just help support staff development growth and coverage. So we haven't been to the point in several years where we've been able to hire above our authorized strength, but it's certainly a very, very advantageous strategy because, 2 months from now, I may lose an officer to another agency, or somebody wishes to just step out of the career and do something different. So my allocated budgeted strength right now is 37 police officers. I'm 3 short right now. Overall staff, I'm about 42.2 full-time staff. But the people that do the law enforcement work are at budgeted strength at 37. I'd really like to get to 42. And working with Dan here, and given those recommendations, it's going to allow for development, succession planning. I think the police department does a phenomenal job on developing new leaders within the organization to carry that succession planning. And you probably saw a seamless change when Chief Hiller left and I stepped in. It was probably seamless for the community and seamless for staff and council. So I think the police department does a really good job, but it comes back to having the right amount of staffing to it and having the support in our budget to support that.
And a little bit to that is, our front line staff, if it's, the streets department, or police department, or library, takes a team behind the team, right, to do it. So as they need more police officers, there's the HR, there's the IT folks. So that's where sometimes you're gonna see that, you have to do, I think it's somewhere in there that we grow balanced, right? That we can't just flood the police officers, but that there's not the IT support, or there's not the HR to be able to do that training. So as an organization, the ship has to rise as a whole. The other piece that I just like to make sure that we know, with public safety infrastructure, we talk a lot about police and fire station that we need there, but it's also the readiness of our community, for our community. So that's, I work with both chiefs and Emily on this of just having some trainings and being able to, they know how to run their show, but how do we run it if we have that windstorm? How do we have, if a tornado were to come through, how are we prepared, not just as the city, but we work with our partners too, as the school district, ODU, and, the county, on how best to test. But that all takes time and effort and work and some of these things that kind of need. So, every one of these is loaded in a different spin and just not, the organization effectiveness is having a lot of things that we're talking about. Sean has a pavement plan, right? That's organization effectiveness of like having that stuff ready to go, so it's part of that long-term planning and vision. So I don't want to beat this horse too much, but it's just not the title, it's so much more.
We're on the front side of our conversation today, right? So I think clearly setting these high level outcomes as the vision. And throughout the day, we'll hear about the financial management plan. So this vision is going to tell us where we're going. Financial management plan, in very simplistic terms, will tell us what resources we have to work with. And then at the end of the day, you'll hear from us what the plan is for staff then to develop some more specific action plans regarding how are we going to get there, right? I don't know that any one of these we're going to say, check, done. That being said, what we can do is take some very specific and intentional steps in the right direction to make sure that we're all moving in the right direction to achieve that vision that makes sense for us.
And this work plan that Emily's talking about will be something that you hold us accountable, right? We come in and do check-ins. I think that's one of our changes that we really want to do is quarterly check-ins to say, here's what we've been working on, here's how far we got. And a lot of this stuff is ongoing, it's not check it done, but here's the progress we're making, here's what we're shooting for, here's what we're working towards, so we can see that continuous improvement, continuous movement to us.
So on the 19th, when we were at our retreat, we also spent some time learning about each other and about our strengths and how to work best as a team. That is something that Jenna set the tone at our all-staff meeting in January, really taking a deep dive into how do we as staff members all work together as a team to make sure that we're serving the community and fulfilling that vision set by council. So if we're ready to kind of move on to the next step, I would invite Angie from HR up to give us an update on the work that is happening across the organization in regard to really getting to know ourselves and how we can work best together as a team.
I'm just gonna make one comment, from my perspective of public safety infrastructure. That's kind of on us. We better make it happen. To build those things of the organizational effectiveness, again, starts with us, but it's up to managing community growth. Troy, that's you. We need to increase the denominator. And I oversimplify it. Here's our expenses. Here's the denominator is the number of people that are paying taxes. And if that's 30,000 and community growth, it makes it so much easier. Kevin made comments, there's other cities that denominator is getting smaller. So flat taxes a little bit. If you increase the denominator, divide it over a bigger base, that makes it so much easier to get the staff a good cheap slate. And do some of the things that we want to do as a community. So again, we need to increase the denominator and divide those costs over a bigger base. That's just my comment. I'm a financial guy, so that's, I try and oversimplify it. So if it's, $100 worth of expense, you get 100 people, it's $1. If the denominator gets smaller and it's 80 people and you still have 100, it goes up. If you get 110 or 100, it gets smaller, and everybody's happy. So again, that's just my comment. I'm sorry to put it all on you, Troy, but it is.
Get that 30 by the end of the week is what I just heard.
Exactly, thank you, Kevin.
So Dan is firing up Her Connection. This council has invested so much into our culture for probably 4 years, really, financially, and then allowed us the resources and time to make sure we're doing our staff evaluations and staff checking in with staff. And one of the things that we continuously hear where our meters now we go up is conflict resolution and communication. And so again, as we talked earlier about communication, is like, what is it? And yet I feel like part of our communication gap in our staffing is the connection. And so at our annual staff meeting in January, we kicked it off with a theme that says the power of you. Meaning, know yourself, because everybody is an individual, adds to the team, like what you bring to it. And so if you can understand your natural skills and your natural area that is your sweet spot, it's really easy to perform, especially if you're in the right seat. We also talk about get to know your neighbors, because if I know how Matt communicates or some things that Matt is naturally great at, it's a lot easier to learn from Matt how we work better together. And so we invested in some time and money into getting to do this, not only for our leaders, but for our council and for every person in our organization, because we felt like it was necessarily a tool or a supervisor to know their team, and for their teammates to know each other, and for them to know their leader or their coach, however you want to say it. So we invested where people were able to take this, learn about it. I think that's what Ange is going to talk a little bit about when we get to it. But so far, it's been pretty positive, really positive. I mean, you guys got to experience it too. It's just kind of fun to somebody who's where and sometimes it's your blind spots that we're uncovering too. There's a cord on the other side, Ange, and think about it. If you want to pull it out, you can just put it direct connected. Brian likes it when I say plug this in. Like this. I'll be right back. You go without me.
I want to send it over to Friends Cheers. It just sits down there somewhere.
I am.
No, yeah, it's a full one.
How are you?
I'm in the corner.
Oh, sorry.
I think it was a morning time. I didn't do a morning. So, yeah.
There we go. All right.
You lost some weight. How'd you do it? You lost some weight?
Sure. One person got cut off at the end a little bit. Yeah, you tell me when we're ready.
All right, let's get going here.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Honorable Council, Mayor, and Commissioner, for allowing me to take about 30 minutes today of your time. My name is Angie Jarrett, and I am an HR specialist here with the City of Owatonna. I serve on Rachel's team. I am an employee, so I'm pretty low level here. I don't have a fancy title or serve in a high leadership role.
Just a minute, did you hear my comment about those closest to work?
Perhaps that is it. So I show up to work every day, and I can honestly say, as an employee of the City of Owatonna, I do take a lot of pride in my work here. And part of my speaking today is when I first started here, I saw I was really attracted to our purpose and our values. And every day that I've been here, that has definitely been reflected in the work that we do. And our city administration has made it very clear that that is definitely a part of our culture here and who we are as a work community, if you will. So as we get started here, one of the things that I volunteered for. I
is the DISC. So our administration has said to our staff, we really want to invest in our staff. We really want to learn, we want to be able to have them grow, learn about themselves, learn about each other, and that's part of where I come in. So this is a picture from our all-staff meeting that was in January, and the theme from that staff meeting was the power of youth. So this is from that. The theme of the year is the 2026 Pride in Our Work, and specifically from our purpose and values, we show up prepared to work, and we strive for excellence in all that we do. So we commit to continuously learn and improve each day, and we believe that if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And so this that I'm going to talk about today, I've taken on the road to all staff within the city, and we've really rolled this out, and this is the DISC. And so it's my understanding that all of you have recently also taken the DISC, maybe have taken it in the past as well. And so this is just a little bit of background on how we've gotten to where we are today and also where we're going with it. So this is the schedule. So we started with the rollout at the all-staff meeting. So in February, we started with our executive team. They were the first to take their questionnaires, followed by our manager supervisor group, and then they all received their results. And then we incorporated our culture team as well. So our culture team is really helping to champion this throughout the entire city with all of our staff. Then as we continued on through the month of March, I met with various work groups as well. And all the way up through today, I'm still continuing to meet with each of the work groups throughout all of the departments to deliver their results from their questionnaires. So I would say that we're probably about 80–85% complete on those, with the anticipation of the wrap-up coming May 1st. So we think of it as starting from the ground up. So DISC 0 was the rollout, the explanation. DISC 1 was the discovery of you and the power of you, and the discovering of what DISC is. And as we continue this, we'll be on a monthly rollout with all staff that the leadership team will then lead, starting with DISC 2, 3, and then so on and so forth. So what is the DISC? So the DISC has been around for over 100 years. It's been tried and true. I'm not a psychologist. I don't claim to be. You probably wouldn't want me to be, but I am passionate about our employees. I'm passionate about our culture. I'm passionate about the work that we do. I'm very passionate about our community that we serve. And the DISC in itself breaks it apart into 4 quadrants. It breaks people into 4 quadrants. So whether you're more task-oriented or people-oriented on that vertical line, or horizontal line, whether you're more reserved or active. And so it breaks it by D, I, S, and C. So the D meaning more direct, the I meaning more influential, the S being those steady, and then the C being those more conscientious or calculated things. And so you think about, well, we don't necessarily want to put labels on people, and that isn't necessarily what we're doing. It's more about how we tend to go about doing things. And everybody is capable of being any one of those quadrants. It's just how we prefer to do things, or our natural style. I prefer, or it's more natural to me, to do things one way, but I can do it a different way. It just might take a little more energy. So if you look at, this gives a little bit more detail into what describes each of the 4 styles. So the D style can be direct, demanding, results-oriented, assertive, decisive, independent, impatient, and strong-willed. And so keeping in mind, none of these are bad. They're all good, and they're all what's right about us. And when I talk with our staff and our team and our work groups, that's the important thing to keep in mind, because each one of these styles brings a positive impact to each of our work groups. And there isn't one style that's better than another either. This is everything that's right about us. And having a well-rounded group, that's powerful. If we're all the same, I'd imagine that it would be pretty hard to get things accomplished. So the D style, the I style, Those are the more outgoing, spontaneous, enthusiastic, optimistic, animated, persuasive, expressive. So you think of the D style, those are our ones, let's get this done, let's bring it forward, let's take it to the next level, let's go. Our I style, they're the ones bringing the team together. Let's get this going. Come on, we can do this. Bring that extra energy and that positivity. That S style, steady, caring, supportive, pleasant, sincere, patient, calm, stable. They're behind the scenes. They're working hard. They want to make sure that we're doing it right, but we're taking it and being very methodical. And our C style, they're analytical, they're detailed, exact, systematic, very cautious, thorough, private, logical. They're really dissecting, taking things in, making sure that we are approaching things with a lot of caution, taking a look at every info. So as you can see, it's how we go about doing things, not necessarily who we are as a person, how we go about doing things as a team. So let's talk about our executive team here. So as our executive team, I'm also going to include our council in this as well. You're going to see the dots on the map, so don't worry, I won't call you out. But this is just a general overview of who the executive team is and where they fall on the DISC map. So as you can see, there's dots on the map, and I also broke it apart into percentages and numbers on here. So in the 4 quadrants on the upper right, you can see the D, and then there's words that follow all the way around in that square. So the closer you get to that letter, those words tend to describe that trait more. And then the further you get to the next letter, then so on and so forth, more descriptors. And then each one of those little shapes defines more detail, but we're not gonna hit that today. So as you can see, we're gonna look at those 4 quadrants, right? So you can see the majority of our executive team are within that S and that C area. So very stable, very trustworthy, responsive, committed. They're very patient, right? Persistent, they like details. So we don't have a lot of quick to think, or not quick to think, pardon me, I misspoke, quick to react, right? We think things through, we're careful, we're steady. That's how we prefer to do things. However, this is not indicative of our ability to do things, and I want to make that very clear, right? We all can do it if we have to do it. We just prefer to go about it in this way. So reaching across to that D, we can do it, it just might take a little more energy. And same with those I's, those are our influencers, right? Get that team motivated, get them ready to go, get them excited about it. Any questions on those at all? Okay. So here's all the stats. So I have a little asterisk on here because this is to date. Like I said, we haven't gotten everyone encompassed in this yet, but those that we have, this is our dot map, and this is pretty powerful. So you can see on our dot map, we are a well-rounded team. So of all the staff, and this includes the entire executive team too, this includes all of our full-time, part-time, and any paid-on-call staff in this that have taken it thus far, 158 staff. So I know there's not probably 158 dots on here, but in those small little groupings, those are strong clusters of where we have the majority of our staff. But this is really powerful to see how well-rounded we really truly are. And so when we talk about our culture, when we talk about our ways of doing things, we have that ability to cross those paths, to be able to pull off our strengths, to be able to accomplish things, and to follow those purpose, those values, and meet those goals, those deadlines, because we have those people in those places to be able to do that.
I haven't seen this chart before yet, so this is pretty fun to see.
Yeah, it is really neat. Almost all of them. So, and just as an overall, worldwide, this has been, like I said, around for over 100 years. It's in multiple countries. It's been used in many organizations. The fewest percentage that you will see worldwide is in the D category, and the most that you will see is in the S category. So I would say we're right in line with everyone else in the world, but I think what really makes us unique is when you see the leadership team and how careful and considerate that they are when making their decisions, when we have some staff that also are maybe able to carry out those decisions, to follow through on those things, to see those visions, to carry on, and that's what's really neat and powerful to see. So how do our individual profiles impact our team culture? So as I went around to these various work groups, I would say for me, what I've seen pretty consistently and has been the most powerful thing is we talk about these things before they get their results and to see their profiles. And each person receives their profile, and so we won't be sharing those as private personnel data. But they get their own and they get to see it. And they take the first few minutes to really digest that data, that information, right? And they review it, and pretty soon they're smiling. And then pretty soon you hear some giggling and some laughter. Pretty soon they're chatting with their neighbor. And then pretty soon they're chatting with their other neighbor. And they look around and they say, oh, this is so spot on, this is so me. And they're like, I didn't know you were that way. I didn't know you were that way. And pretty soon you have this dialogue of understanding, saying, well, I didn't know that you were that direct, or I didn't know you liked checklists. I didn't know you preferred it that way. I didn't know you were maybe that influential person that didn't like checklists. And so they're learning about themselves, but they're also learning about each other. And what's really the strength in that is that as the leadership team here, they can use that then as, all right, we have tasks to complete. You might prefer to do things one way, but you might prefer to do things another way. How can we build upon those to really accomplish those strong, and move those really strong mountains, move those hills, and really get things accomplished. And so I was trying to think, how can I put into words today on really what our culture is, what it means, and how it truly can define us as a work group in the city. And the things that came to mind is it's really truly a shared way that we understand each other and how we work together. And our behaviors, our expectations, it's what creates our comfort and our belonging. And that it sometimes can make us also resist change too. And this has been a new concept to us. And for the most part, everybody has come in with an open mind. They've come in with the idea of, I can adapt to this. And our culture is truly what forms our experiences. And we can't control it, but we can understand it, and we can guide it, and we can help it evolve. And that's one thing that we've seen through this DISC, and how we communicate together can help us to solve problems, can help us to relate to each other, and help us to adapt to all of our situations that come our way. So ultimately, it's going to shape how we grow as individuals and how we grow as an organization. And we're seeing that. And we've seen that with our leadership. We've seen that with our, like I said, I'm pretty low level. I've seen that with my leadership and my leadership's leadership. And we've seen that with our council. We're creating something bigger than us. And ultimately, it's how we interact with our customers, which is our public and our community as well. So here's just a little bit of a pie chart, because I like pictures, on our team DISC culture. So you can see, like, this is how we are measuring up. That S and that C, we're cooperative, we're patient, we're stable, we're detail-oriented, we're analytical, we're precise. That I, we're people-focused, enthusiastic, and we're results-driven and directed. We are a well-rounded group of people. Okay, well, that is what I had for you today. And I thank you so much for listening to me and bearing with my technical difficulties at the beginning of this. Are there any questions at all?
like to add that, you know, we didn't require everybody to take this, only if they were willing. And some people needed to kind of see it roll out, and then others now are pulling back on the next one, because they realize that, you know, it's not counting those, you know, what your grades were in high school, thank goodness. And so I think people are just more realizing what a tool it is to be know about yourself and know your name, so it's fun to see it. Hopefully we can practice that after communication.
You're an expert, right?
So I didn't start as an expert.
She's
I
not
had
there.
many people that believed in me when I said, hey, I'd like to do this, and they said yes.
My question would be for the council, because you could pretty much throw a blanket over all of us down in the S, was it S, right? What pitfalls does that, do we have blind spots that way?
Yeah, blind spots. We all have blind spots, right? We call those areas for growth, right? There's nothing wrong with us, but everybody has those, right? And so our blind spots, when we can recognize those, we can grow from them. We can learn and we can grow. And that's exactly what those are.
So knowing that we have very little D, I suppose Murphy's the only one on the chart that was a D.
He's an engineer.
He's a hockey player, he used to just slash and
That's true.
Because we have almost no D in the room practically, does that leave anything in particular in your mind? Boy, we better keep an eye out for this.
Right, yeah, and it might be more of a challenge, right? It doesn't have any reflection on our ability to be a D when we need to be a D. It just might take more energy to do so. And so
Consciously
those-
got it.
Yep, we have to be conscious about it. Yep, that's exactly it. Those blind spots.
I know you can.
Yeah,
Heard it.
it's not my default, but.
Default.
Wow.
So this has been a great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie.
I think Don has something.
I got money from Volky.
Oh.
He loaned it to me.
Okay.
So one thing I think we, as a organization, I mean, we made a significant investment here. And we want to make sure that we get the best value. You know, based on what you're telling us, it looks like it's heading forward. Now I want to make a comment about leaving guns and knives at the door, other than a few individuals who keep their guns. They're $3 common. Okay. I'm using the BS meter, and I'm gonna use it on executive group. Is this worthwhile, or is this BS? So, again, you're gonna get asked this question over and over and over again, because it's a significant investment. It's a significant investment of dollars, time, and energy. Is it worthwhile?
I'm HR, so I think 100% yes.
Well, you're from HR.
Yeah, I mean, I always love training development and people knowing about each other, and it's just amazing when someone realizes why they are where they are able to interact so much better. We're seeing that happen so quickly. And something that we heard from staff right away was like, I just want to come here and I want to do my job. I don't want to do all this nitty gritty stuff. And then as soon as Angie comes in and gives them their stuff, like she said, there's kind of silence, and then they start to get it and realize it and start to giggle and talk about their neighbor. And so sometimes they look at it and they're like, oh, this is just what kind of spoken is, like, we don't want it. But now as they're starting to get the hang of it and speak the same language and understand each other, it's really developing. So, and this is something that they said too, like, is this gonna be a one-time thing? Is we're just gonna see it and we're not gonna hear about it again? And that's something that we're really trying to work on, is to continue it and figure out how you interact with your work and have your managers actually know your employees, because that's where it kind of started off with our managers and supervisors. We're hearing about themselves, but they didn't know actually how their team worked. So it's been a very notice for our managers and supervisors, but that's the HR answer, so. Anyone else?
No, that's the only way that it's not BS, is that if we take this information and use it and continue to use it, and the city does have a plan to do that, you know, monthly meetings with staff to go over these results. So, I think we've all been part of movements and tests and things like that you do, and that's it. It gets put on the shelf, for personnel results, but this one feels like there's some real intention and some real thought into taking the information and moving it in a constructive direction.
Is that concur, everybody concur? Because I was at an organization and it was just labor of the month. And you take it mess, there's the good stuff.
One of the things we're committed to, Don, is we don't always get it right. And so we back up, readjust, right? And we had a couple, opportunities last year that didn't pan out the way we wanted to, but we won't quit. Because the investment is into our biggest asset, our staff, right?
72% of our resources are related to human capital.
So we need to develop them, understand how best to have them work together and be, it's like gears, right? They gotta blend together and work together, that's what will move us forward. So we purposely designed what Ian just talked about, is that it's not a flavor. It's not check the box, I got it done. It's a tool to help our managers be leaders, people managers. It's to help our people be better coworkers. And so we have something scheduled every month. And you're not kidding, it takes resources to do this. And we're committed to doing it because that's the only way we're gonna do it.
No, it's promised.
Yes.
We promise we're gonna do this. We promise that we are gonna cultivate our people to be better. Again, that's what we're all about. And I'm sorry to talk so much again, I probably leave your butt.
Chief Mondale.
Yeah, just, taken the disc about 4 times in my career, and 3 times in the last 4 years, and it changes. So it changes, but I know our focus on this was kind of have a work mindset when you take this. So maybe on the prior ones, maybe it was closer not with that mindset, but it does change. It changes with work experience, even though it comes with life experience, but it's not just a one-time, this yours and the staff's would maybe change 2 years from now. But I think what's most powerful for me, using these tools and an employee is willing to share theirs, like, hey, can I see your desk? Because it is personal information, it's private, so if you can ask them to share with you, you may have to deal with an employee and you're like, I'm not sure how I'm gonna approach this, and I'm not really sure where they sit on the desk. Certainly just see if you can look at it, and it helps kind of formulate your plan, how you're gonna.
I showed mine to my wife. And again, you put it in a context that's related to being on the council. Because I know exactly where it was. And she goes, that's BS. Because you're over here, not down here. So again, I think it was a great point when it's in your environment. Because there were people on the council that might not be in the D part, but they're up in the D part more so.
We specifically ask people to take it as you're at work or as you're a council member. So, what it tells us is our council is very thoughtful and very, want to have a plan and they're not just, let's go, they want to have, so.
I did the same thing. I shared it with my wife and my daughter and son. And I said, what do you think? That's not you. I said, this is from the city council. That is you. I thought it was a good thing.
I know we typically don't do this, but Gail had just asked to say one thing. Gail, you get 30 seconds. I know that's
Yeah,
not.
60. I had used the DISC system in my little business with my daycare center in South Minneapolis. It started with just the employees because we had really diverse everything. And we got to understand each other. And then it kind of branched out where we could see where the kids were, little tiny kids, you knew if they were a D or an S. And you were able to work and interact with them. And then from that, it branched out to being able to have the skills to deal with the parents, the social workers, people in the community. And it's, if you think about it, with the groups that I'm working with, as we bring concerns to you, I'm definitely using the DISC. And if you think of the people that I surround myself with, and start thinking of the letters, and how the team has been built and interacting, because definitely I've been always cognizant of what letters like Melissa was. And it's a fluid thing. You're not always pigeonholed in one letter. How you react with your family, how you react with the community, your spouse, it's gonna change. But you're also gonna bring out skills you didn't think you had. And that certainly was the case with, I think, one person in the group. One of her letters really escalated. So that's what I was gonna say, it's a great thing, it's a great thing to interact with the community. It gives you a minute to take a deep breath in the end, especially when a bee gets up in your face. That you take a deep breath and like, what are they saying, you know? Or when a D is confronted with a bunch of S's and just, you know, has to figure out how to deal with them. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Gail. Ange, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me, I appreciate your time.
Very enlightening. I did like the scattergram with all the employees, that was pretty cool.
Yes.
I think we got to check in on just last council meeting we had, during our study session, we had a small time frame for our 30 minutes on our time frame for the process evaluation. We promised that we would come back and see if there was any questions on any of that we had. Not trying to come up with anything, but wanted to give you definitely a chance to ask any follow-up questions that you may have had on the process evaluation that we did for our finance, our internal controls. We have Jody here to speak to them too. But anyways, do you have any questions or follow-up? If there isn't any, we'll move on.
So Jody's not presenting.
Nope, because we already did. It's just, Emily had mentioned that we could bring it back to today to see if there was anything that people had questions on that we didn't have a chance to cover.
So one thing, I was gonna ask this, that's good, sorry. Moving forward, in the future, I know Councilmember McCann, Councilmember Boki, and myself have been asking for more up-to-date things, maybe even a monthly thing in the packet, where we stand. Will we get to that point where we are able to see? I mean, pretty much it's been 6 months later, we get last year, and that's useless. If we were at least within a couple of months, it would be helpful for us.
Council members, yeah, absolutely, that is our goal. You should be getting financial updates regularly on a monthly, sometimes quarterly. The only time that there might be some delay is at year end, because they're focused on doing the audit, so they can focus on the updates, so that may be a couple months delay. You would probably get a preliminary to show where you're at, and then a final once the audit's over. But our goal is to establish a practice of being able to provide financial information on a monthly basis.
Okay, that would be good, thank you.
Jody, would it be on the first or the second council meeting?
Probably the second.
Okay, so that's where they should be looking for these, updated. We had one in April, so probably the one will be updated maybe on the second. So there's no other question, oh,
How close are we to completing the 2025 year report?
So the audit, council members, the audit is scheduled for May 18th. So we are wrapping up the audit prep. They will go through a week of field work, and then the financial report, I think, is scheduled for that first week in July. We have to submit if you want to get the award for the GFOA, which is the Joint Finance Officers Organization, you can submit it at the end of June, and that deadline is June 30th. But the auditors, because they kind of came in late, asked for that July date, first council meeting in July, to present their findings.
so we're in prep, auditor, they'll be on site in the middle of May 18th, the week that we.
They won't be on site, they're going to be doing that remotely.
That's right, that's when they'll be doing their audit, work, then they go back to the function. So then, Dan, that's when you get the true audited in 2025 number. There was a preliminary one that was in the last, council packet, but if there's any adjustments, right, from the auditor's adjustment, then that's why we can't say that's right, because we have to make some adjustments either way. He's back on there.
Yes.
But that's okay, you go ahead.
As long as she's here, we gotta ask. So if we get to the point where we get a monthly report, is there something you use with other councils? We're obviously not accountants like you are, so if you give us this long list of stuff, we don't know what that is. But is there some specific things that you can show us on a monthly basis that keeps us up to date?
Mayor and council, that is actually a really good question, because we want to know what data that we want to receive. So if you have looked at the preliminary data, if that you want it enhanced anyway, that's good for us to know, because we can structure structure the report to what you want to see on a monthly basis. So I would send comments to Jenna and Emily, and then we can work on drafting any additional enhancements that you want to that report.
So could we have a couple options, like here's one, so they can say like, I like this one, or I like this one?
Yeah.
I think that might be helpful, because they're probably not.
Yeah, typically you get a financial report and it's by fund, and then you also get one by departments, so you can hold departments accountable, to their budget. You usually do see a couple different versions.
Year-end preliminary showed about $2 million surplus. And some of that was personnel that we didn't backfill. Some of that was some departments held off for purchasing, whatever, because we really didn't know exactly where we were preliminary. We were $2 million in black. When can I find the amount that Dan is open for us?
So that's an investment, conversation we've had, Brian come in, but maybe I'll let Dan answer.
I figure. What are you holding for us and all our other institutions that are holding our
So
investments?
that's that fund account, right, is that what?
So the way the city's portfolio is currently set up, you are using Elliott Investment Partners for your general investment services. And that would be held in a custodial account in the name of the city. And then I would defer to Jody a bit, but I imagine the city also then has a general depository account that you use for any cash flow or regular activities, even cutting checks, making payroll, things of that nature. And normally what happens, your investment advisor, your finance director, in this case, your finance director, would really work hand in glove to make sure that the cash flows of the city match up with the demands placed on the investment portfolio. So money is transferred, usually on a pretty regular basis, back and forth to make sure you're maximizing yield, but you also have the cash flow to make any payments against any claims against the
From Rhonda, I asked her, and she gave me 2 sheets that showed when it was purchased, par value, discount. I think there were 4 different columns that she showed me. Will we ever get that? I mean, we've still kind of tap danced around. How much do we got? Is it a secret or what? We tap danced around the figure.
At this point in time, and we're working a little ahead, so that's all right, but we are planning at this point in time to provide an investment portfolio update to the council in May. So that's the current plan.
It's also noted in here too, what the funds, what the investment.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, when we go through the financial management plan, we will talk about the available balances in each fund that is identified in the plan.
And then.
You'll hear about it today too. And then I sent that to you in the PowerPoint too. So there's numbers in there. But I feel like we have a disconnect. Like we talk accounting language and you guys talk business language. And I feel like we're too passive here. So I think you're asking for, you were talking about your funds and your.
I'd like to make sure that all our stormwater funds are there for Murphy and our EDA and HRA. Those are all in a special fund that we try not to mix. I know that we've talked about borrowing from one to another.
So Deanna, Jody, how many funds do we have? 30?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but to answer your question, they are definitely designated in individual funds. They are not commingled. And you can get a report, financial report by fund. And if that's something that you want to get, most council focuses on the general fund, but if that's something that you would like to receive too, we would get you a financial report by fund, which would designate the water, the stormwater fund or capital funds, or those designated funds.
Thank you. I just have a couple quick things. Number one, on the reporting, like if we were to get kind of a simplified but comprehensive report, I think highlighting anomalies would be the one thing, because when we move things around, it always comes up, okay, this changed significantly. We can highlight simply things like that, probably helps us. And getting back to maybe Dan's question, I did ask this question previously. In a purely hypothetical, theoretical situation, if we liquidated all of our assets that are cash and cash equivalents, all our funds, all that stuff, how much money is actually? I think we're probably talking $60 million. If in a theoretical world, you could just sell everything today, or what you all have, how much money is that? Which is very simple.
You're talking about getting rid of MRFs, wastewater funds and.
Just what's the total number? Like, what do we have in wastewater? What do we have in
Grand total.
VRF?
Every fund total.
Yeah, if we just, what's the total number of all of the assets we have that are invested or in cash? And so we kind of have a rough idea, we had a rough idea of that number. We weren't even close to that point yet, but very roughly.
Yeah, certainly. So at this point in time, again, you may recall from the conversation, the numbers that we were quoting you was as of 12/31/24, because that was the latest audited financial statements of the city. And between your governmental and enterprise funds, we're looking at basically right around $61.9 million. Now, of course, the audit has to be completed, we need to see how the city performed in 2025 and then currently in 2026. So it's always going to be a snapshot in time. And you'll get better information about some of that when the audit is presented, as I understand, the first meeting in July.
So approximately 60 million.
Yeah, which was just, for my own information, I just was curious, like, what do we all have without parsing
A
it
lot
out?
of strings to those pots.
Absolutely. It's- So we saw Brook Street, we saw all the issues.
Go ahead, just have a question. You made a comment that from an accounting standpoint, you're putting in certain buckets, but commingling them from an investment standpoint, so you can maximize the return that you can get.
Here's most of that sense.
So,
You pull your cash to yield the best results.
so kind of piggybacking what Nate said, we've got $51 million. And we're only gonna do $7 million for you, and we're only gonna do $4 million for you, get everything together, and then we'll figure it out.
Yeah, Mary, comes not to get technical, and I'm in comms, right? I like to get technical. The pooled cash does get pooled for the investment purposes. And then what we do is we take a snapshot look at what each fund has available and then distribute the interest earnings accordingly. So they do, each fund does get their fair share of that interest from investments.
And then I have just a general question. When we start doing our budgeting, are we going to have 25 unaudited financial numbers so we can actually see what that is and compare it to what 25 was budgeted at in 26? So, because that just drove me crazy that we were budgeting for this fiscal year based on budget of 24, 25. Because that might not be an accurate number. So even though they might not be fully audited yet, I think having those numbers, for most of the people out here, all people, I mean, being business people, you look at a financial statement going, well, I don't know where we are right now. It's not, it's a snapshot.
Budget to actual, yeah.
Yes, that's where I'm coming from. I need to know that.
Mayor and council, that's practice. You should always have that actual number. And if it's not, I mean, you should be pretty close by the time budget starts. Pretty good idea of where you are, and you should be seeing those actual numbers.
Because I think that's really, really important based on all the things we're looking at and based on what we have already looked at and talked about. We need to know those numbers so that we're making an accurate and informed decision financially on where we're going.
100%. And you want to look at that anyway. You usually have 3 years of data to look at the historical trend. So you can see, you might have 1 year that is, has a high variance for some reason. So you want to have 3 years of data.
Absolutely. I mean, that's important. I think going forward on the financial plan, that's helpful for us to see what those trend numbers are. Because there's going to be potentially an anomaly when we build fire and police stations. And what that's going to look like. And we're trying to, as much as possible, make it, steady growth rather than going up and down. Nobody wants
to take lunch and then hit it, or do you want it, it's about an hour long, and so how do you want to proceed?
We wanna go now or at 11:40 or 12:45? Right now?
Go now, and then we can, let them mill over and we, or talk a little bit about it then after lunch. Okay, Dan, you're up.
Right after the financial stuff we talked about.
Yes, absolutely. Am I missing something, Emily?
I heard take a break.
I heard take a break, yes.
She totally disregarded what we said.
I just pick up my own stuff. Okay, hold up.
There's that transparency again, you know.
Short 10-minute break, or do you want a break?
I leave it up to Mr. Burbank.
Perfect.
Let's eat lunch.
I need lunch, okay.
Can we make it a working
I
lunch?
just need to make sure that we got it going.
Can we make it
You
a
can
working?
make it a working lunch too, whatever you like.
Huh?
Let me just double check to make sure it's ready to go.
It's, it's stew.
That's all.
Let's work through it.
That was the case. We would have already have known that.
Sean's used steak for lunch.
What's that, Tom? Where?
Dan, will you start your presentation? It's not ready.
So we're gonna start the presentation, Mr. Stu's not really hot enough yet, so.
Play with it.
So are we moving forward with?
We're moving forward,
Moving
yes.
forward. Okay, so before Dan gets started, I just want to be very intentionally and clearly explain kind of the difference between, you know, on last week's study session, we heard about the process evaluation that ABDO is working on. And now today we're hearing about the financial management plan that Ellers has been working on. Those are two separate projects. Ellers and ABDO obviously work together, and share information where needed, but the ABDO process evaluation, that was really focused on the day-to-day core financial processing and procedures. What Ellers is working on with the financial management plan, that's the big picture, long-term financial management plan for the city moving forward. So I just want to very clearly distinguish those two projects and make sure that we don't get anybody confused regarding how they're connected or not.
Thank you very much for the introduction and the clarification. As mentioned, my name is Dan Fisher. I'm a principal advisor with Ellers and Associates, and helping to put together a long-term financial management plan. I would also say to council and regards to ABDO for what they've done to date and their assistance in this project. It had really to the point made earlier was a team effort to try to bring all of this together for the council today. So I won't go through some of these first slides in great detail because you have seen some of this in previous presentations when we talked about kind of what is the financial management plan, what we expect today. But just as a way of reminder, we're really focusing on property tax supported funds. We're not necessarily looking at enterprises, although we will talk about the stormwater fund because there's a small amount of property tax that flows to that particular fund. But just as you may recall, when we put together a financial management plan, we look at really the whole universe of activities of the organization from a financial perspective. So we're looking at all the previous actions of the governing body, we're looking at existing and future operating costs based on some assumptions that I'll describe in a few slides here. We look at all the capital improvement and equipment plans. We have the existing and future debt plans. Those are also factored in. And then we also make some adjustments based on the tax base of what may happen reasonably over the next 10 years. So the thing to keep in mind is that we're really looking at these costs and make sure they're sustainable over the next 10 years under a certain set of assumptions. And so much like when you get your annual financial reports, see this as a snapshot in time. It will certainly change as these projects become more documented, the council makes choices, and you get additional information about their costs and expectations over time. And to come all the way to the end of the presentation, one of the recommendations we always make is that a community update the financial management plan on, we could say, a regular basis. That might be annually, it might be every other year, it might be every 3 years. It really depends on the individual activities of the organization and how much financial stress is being placed on it as you work through capital projects, not ongoing changes. So, a few of the benefits, of course, of financial management planning: it translates vision into action. Jenna had mentioned this earlier. You have a bunch of great ideas with plans, and invariably the question that gets asked next is, how do we pay for it? And so the financial management plan helps answer that question. It does that by identifying different funding sources for those priorities. It gives the council and staff the opportunity to weigh those priorities against those funding sources, basically evaluating trade-offs and opportunity costs that exist for your financing sources. It's a great tool to help manage community expectations in terms of what is possible from a financial perspective within the community. It helps you look at assets and identify appropriate fund balances. So to Dan's point earlier, we'll talk about individual funds and the balances within those funds and the pressure that we're seeing on those individual funds. I can say, being a former finance director, it reduces stress in the budget process because we're going to talk about some of the moving parts of these funds and get feedback from the council, and then usually we use that information to help inform the annual budget process. So the next thing is later, some of this will have already been talked about and shouldn't come as a great surprise to the council or staff. And so it's a great launching off point when you're creating an experience. We also know it helps communicate your long-term plans to external parties, and there's a few things to think about here. First is any funding partners. So if you're working potentially with the state or the county or other neighboring political subdivisions, it's a great way to talk to them about the resources you have available when you plan on doing certain things. The most classic example being the road project if you're partnering with the county. And also your credit rating agency loves long-term financial planning. They really like to see that the council is keeping an eye on the horizon, peeking around corners, to mix metaphors, and making sure that you have a good understanding of the financial position of the city today, and as it might change over time based on your current plans. And then perhaps most beneficial to the staff, it really does help reduce reactivity on particular situations. So you have a keen understanding of your financial position, and then when something happens, to use the word earlier, pickup occurs, you have a good sense of how much money you have in each fund and what you can draw on and what the financial wherewithal is of the community to respond to those unforeseen circumstances. So when we look at the financial management plan for the city of Owatonna, we did look at a series of funds, including the general fund, the 3 EDA funds, the capital project funds, which are quite a few. The building fund, the sales tax fund, we'll talk about stormwater funds in detail, the vehicle replacement fund. We will do this kind of in summary with the debt service fund, because we do have a number of debt service funds that want for each of your outstanding debt issues, so we can go with them in the aggregate. Today, we actually won't be talking in great detail about the EDA fund or the sales tax fund. The sales tax fund really doesn't have that much activity at this point in time, and the EDA funds are doing exactly what they ought to be doing. So we don't have any additional comments for them. It's worth noting that we did review them. We're just not going to discuss them in great detail here. If there are questions about them, we can certainly answer them after the presentation.
Again, can I ask just one, or say one thing about the sales tax fund? This was Mr. Johnson's question about it, and I think I'll roughly say it. I think we had 600.
Yeah, to that point, at this point in time, the sales tax fund has a current fund balance of right around $700,000. It hasn't had any activity for a number of years, except for the interest allocations that Jody had mentioned earlier. So at the end of each year, the city does an entry and assigns some interest rate based on the proportionate share of the investment portfolio of that $700,000.
But we did get some input from Representative Sexton about how to reallocate that. It sounds like
And it's already done. So we could use it for
We're all
something.
good.
Yeah. So you had asked that question earlier on, I want to make sure we address it for the total everyone, so.
So it's gonna stay in that fund until we determine how to best utilize it?
Yes.
So a few things, a quick chat about, and this has come up in the conversation a little earlier, and Jody already touched on a little bit, but really when we talk about, funds and fund accounting, like what is it? And really for government purposes, it's just a method of segregating all of your different financial resources into funds based on activity. And really each fund identifies the sources and various uses, and if the council has adopted policies, it will also describe the allowable uses for those funds. So this is to say that if you have segregated money, let's say, into those EDA funds come with allowable uses, and you make sure you're spending money in accordance with those allowable uses and the adopted budgets for the respective funds. The thing to keep in mind, and this we talked about a little earlier, kind of being business people, government accounting is not designed to emphasize profitability. It is really designed to emphasize accountability. That's why you end up having so many funds. It's why we focus on allowable uses, and it's why we track revenues and expenditures in individual funds, so we can get good answers to many of the questions the council has been asking throughout our discussion related to the financial position of the organization. The other thing to keep in mind is that we do have different types of funds, and this is a little beyond the scope of the presentation today, but we'll talk about it a little bit. And those different funds have different activities, they have different ways that you account for their activities, and they function in a little different way. And really, when we look at that, when we talk about governmental funds, we are talking about funds that are generally supported by taxes. These are your general funds, the special revenue funds in the case of the EDA, as was mentioned earlier, any debt service funds, and any capital project funds that are used to support any of your capital outlays. Proprietary funds, these are business-like funds or enterprise funds. These are generally supported by user rates fees and charges for service, not necessarily taxes. And the most notable example in the city is the wastewater fund. You also have an internal service fund, vehicle replacement, that you actually have service charges to other funds and departments to fund the replacement of vehicles. And we'll talk about that fund specifically later in the presentation. And then fiduciary funds we really won't get into, but you do have one fiduciary fund, OPEB, which is everyone's favorite topic. In case you're wondering, that stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. So those are basically funds that are held in trust on behalf of the city for employees that have retired and you owe certain obligations to as a result of commitments you made during their term. So we talked about this a little bit, and Jody certainly mentioned some of the accounting that happens, but we always get this question about the investment portfolio and the various funds and how does it all come together. And the thing to keep in mind for accounting purposes, as we mentioned earlier in the conversation and by Jody, the funds are, all the city's money are divided into funds for accounting purposes, basically to track and demonstrate that accountability that I had talked about earlier. But for the points of your investments, we actually commingle all of that cash and pool it to basically meet three goals: to maximize the investment income that the city can earn, to reduce the administrative burden of managing those individual funds and the cash that's associated with them, and to make sure, perhaps most importantly, when it comes to your investment management policy, is that we are managing the liquidity of those assets in a reasonable way, meaning that it comes due at a time that's appropriate in order to make good on the obligations the city has to pay with those resources, and also making sure that you're investing those funds safely. The government is perpetual, and all of this money is everything that you've saved since the beginning of time. And so there are very specific laws, Minnesota Statute 118A, that makes restrictions on the types of things the city can invest in. So you basically can only invest in like other municipal securities, treasuries, agencies, high quality paper. Fortunately, you can't go buy equities or any kind of type of cryptocurrencies. So I suppose you could, but we'd have to talk to the state auditor and maybe a judgment. The thing to keep in mind here when we start looking through these individual funds, when you see those balances, each of those funds, that is a portion of your investment portfolio. So your investments are not like a separate pile of money that you can pull from, maybe like a 401k. It is all of your money pooled for investment purposes, and then it's segregated by those individual funds. So you see those amounts, that's the amount that's available for investments. Some of that $60 million that we were talking about. And then really, why do we need to hang on to all of that?
Question, do we have any unencumbered funds?
Yes, and we'll talk about that when we get into the individual funds. So why do we need fund balances? Why does the city have to hang on to some of this cash? Why can't you just, bring up Ellers and your brokers and say, sell it all and you want to buy something with it? And that's for a few reasons. One, different funds have different cash flows. So in the case of the general fund, you basically rely on 2 property tax settlements a year to fund your operations. So unsurprisingly, the Government Finance Officers Association and the Office of the State Auditor actually recommend that you keep a certain amount of money in reserve, recognizing the fact that you have to make regular payments against those settlements, and you only get them twice a year. So then they come up doing the math, you basically need 35 to 50% of all of that cash in reserve at any given time to make sure that you can take care of the going concern that is the city. You can pay pay the staff, you can pay your claims, you can deal with kind of all of the operational items. The other thing you keep it for, much like in your personal lives, are emergencies, unforeseen circumstances. So there is a storm that rolls through town and it damages a bunch of government buildings, or knocks over a bunch of trees, you pay like overtime to clear roads, or there's a shift in policies at the state level and maybe you don't get as much local government aid as you thought you were gonna get. You're not put in a position where you have to necessarily harm in the long term the financial position of the organization. You have money in reserve that you can pivot accordingly, because the services that you provide really are essential for the daily functioning of lives in the city of Owatonna. The other thing we have reserves for is to make sure that we're thoughtfully deploying capital, because there are very good reasons that you should take action sometimes, and very good reasons to borrow sometimes, and putting you in the strongest possible position to deploy that cash in a very thoughtful way. So moving past kind of the general reasons that you hang on to money and you do some financial planning with it, there are several assumptions and factors that go into a financial management plan. I won't go through these in great detail. But really under number one, the thing that you might notice here is that we generally model that your expenses are going to increase a little faster than your revenues. And that is to avoid any unanticipated budget holes that can occur over the life of the plan. Generally, we would like to show up in any budget year and say, hey, it turns out the expenses were a little less than we estimated, the revenues were a little more than we estimated. So that's a very easy conversation to have with a public entity. It's a much more difficult conversation to show up and have the opposite be true. And so we do tend to see that in a financial management planning scenario, some of these deficits naturally become a little wider because of the kind of small c conservative assumptions that we're making in the plan itself. The other thing that we have modeled is growth in the plan based on conversations with the community development department and staff. So over the next 10 years, we're looking at about 255 single-family homes, 18 multifamily developments, 9 apartments, 9 commercial buildings, 9 industrial buildings. But the thing to keep in mind here with all of this growth, we have assumed that 50% of it would be incentivized by some form of tax increment financing. So that's essentially in the model. We have not included it as a part of the additional tax capacity that would be available for tax levy and tax rate purposes.
Dan, in your growth assumption, the 255 single family, is that assumption a 3 to 5 year? How far out is that assumption going?
It goes out over a decade.
10 years. So 26 houses a year, 2 multifamily, 1 apartment a year. It's simple math.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's not, unless staff gives us more specific instructions, which does happen from time to time, if you know there are certain things in queue, we will model that in certain years, but otherwise, we tend just to parse it out annually, understanding that there may be more in 1 year and less than another year. You may build, 50 homes in 2 years, maybe have a break and then build another 50 homes. It's just kind of depends on things.
Troy, you agree with this assumption?
Yeah, we provided all the input.
Okay.
Can I say you're giving yourself a break on that $100 million a year goal? Once you maintain that.
We did go conservative.
Okay.
Is there gonna be a moment in time where we talk a little more about TIF?
Yes, we have had conversations with staff about providing some more information to the city council about tax increment financing, tax abatements, and other public subsidy questions at a later date. And then otherwise, we've assumed that anything outside of that growth would be expanding by about 2% annually, which we find is usually the kind of 10-year average that most communities experience. You may have years where it goes up a little more, down a little, but generally 2% growth.
So once again, looking at the assumptions, tax capacity, we're looking at about 1.1 tax capacity increase a year for simple math.
Well, for the tax capacity, it's right around $12 million based on a $685 million initial estimate plan.
So 1.2 million per year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
So So a few other things just to mention, when we talk about the general fund, we maintain an unrestricted fund balance of about 45% of expenditures. That's consistent with the council's adopted policy for that fund. When we get into the capital improvement plan and the various funds that support those activities, we're only modeling city costs. And we're excluding any external funding and the associated expenses. That's mainly just because it makes the modeling easier. If you didn't get those outside monies, you wouldn't have the additional expenses. So if they're included or they're excluded, it doesn't really make much of a difference to the overall model. We have about $250 million in projects planned over the next 10 years, supported by a little more than $180 million in bonding. And we have made some assumptions about what that debt would look like based on term and interest rate, depending on the year. I know we'll have a little bit more conversation about this later today, but we have assumed that any street projects are assessed according to the city's current policy. And right now, we are using the 2025 budget, so the question that was raised earlier, because we don't yet have the final 2025 numbers. So we can certainly update the plan once we have that additional information in the audit. The other thing to keep in mind is that the model is included in the plan. So if that were to happen in the future, the model would have to be updated to reflect any associated costs. Again, that's not as concerning because the current plan would be for a local option sales tax, and so that wouldn't necessarily have a property tax impact, which is really the goal of this plan, is to focus on things that are supported by the plan.
I gotta interrupt you again. Number 1 and 2 on the assumptions, you said that's thinking about a decade. Number 2 is about a decade, 10 years, correct?
Yep.
I understand the growth with the 685 million. What's the 11.6 in additional tax capacity? And then number 3, existing tax base increases 2% annually. Is that housing, businesses, all the stuff?
Yes. Yeah, so the first question, the 11.6 million additional tax capacity, the way the state of Minnesota has set up the tax system, which fun fact, we call it a fractional assessment system, and it's the most complicated property tax system in the union, so if you do property tax here, you can do them anywhere. The way it works is you have the estimated market value, and then the state assigns classifications, and then based on that classification, that value is multiplied by that classification rate, and that gives you your tax capacity. There are some additional exclusions and credits that can happen against that tax capacity, but the tax capacity, that's the number that is ultimately considered for property tax setting purposes, and what ends up being your property tax rate that gets applied to all the properties that are subject to property taxes. So the thing to keep in mind is, even though you're adding estimated market value, what we're really looking at is the 11.6 million, the additional capacity that's available to tax against over the next 10 years.
So the 2%, I'm sorry, I'm not totally grasping this. I mean, you haven't met our assessor maybe over at the county. I've never had a 2% increase. It's always way more than that. So is that my house gonna average going up 2% a year for the next 10 years? Cause that's
Yes,
not
for
even
a
close.
the next decade, yeah.
That's not even close to accurate.
Well, it's for the total tax base. So that includes all of the residential homesteads and commercial industrial property, apartments, multifamily, what have you. We can definitely look at the individual community and see what the differences are. When we've done that exercise in other communities, what typically happens once we get out to 10-year averages, it tends to be between 2 and 3%. So for the point of the FMP, we tend to model 2%, again, as the more conservative option.
But really rough math, like your residential properties are paying about 1% of their value in property taxes a year, 2% on commercial. Right, well, isn't that really basic math?
Yep, those are the basic tax rates.
So then you're adding, you're increasing your valuation plus you're increasing your levy, so you're gaining kind of 2 times on that. So even if your house stayed the same, you should still see a levy increase.
Okay.
Because we talk about that all the time. Well, if for this valuation of a house, your property tax is only going to go up this amount of money. Well, very rare does your property value stay the same and the levy goes up. It's your valuation goes up plus the increase in the levy, so you get a double increase because you're getting it on the valuation side and the levy side.
that make sense to you?
It does, yeah.
It makes a little bit of sense to
Yeah.
me, just a little bit.
So we can talk about this for a second. The way you should think about property taxes in Minnesota is that we have a complicated system that gets you to this net tax capacity number. That is the amount of value that is available to tax against in a given community. What you do is every year the council sets a levy. That has to be a specific number and amount of money. So then what our friends at the counties do is once you set the levy, they look at the levy and the tax base and they divide the levy by the tax base, and that gives you your tax rate. And that rate is then what gets applied to all of the properties in the community based on their valuation, and that turns into what is actually the property taxes payable. So the point that was made earlier that can be a little tricky is that if the levy doesn't go up as fast as, let's say, the tax capacity, the rate can actually go down. And then, of course, the very fun thing is every political subdivision does this math, and then you can wind up with a tax rate that's over 100%. Because we multiply things out based on class rates. So it's a complicated system. The thing I think that is most important to take away from this slide is that we have modeled growth based on what the community expects over the next 10 years. And then we have modeled expansion in the existing tax base that's currently in the community of 2% annually over the next decade. That will help inform then what will those tax rates be in any given year based on the anticipated growth in the community and the anticipated change in the levy. That's most important because that helps us model then impacts on median value homes or commercial properties. Like what are people actually going to end up paying once we do all this math and kind of pull all these levers and look at all these different parts.
Thank you.
Hopefully that helps. We can definitely talk about it more.
So I've got a question. I want to go back to the tax capacity. When we're looking at number 2, the growth, single family housing and all of that, how much of that $12 million is because of the growth as opposed to tips coming off and other variables?
So
is the tax capacity, is that assumption based on the growth only? Not with tips coming off?
The model does include any tips that would decertify over the next decade.
Okay.
So that's not called out as a specific assumption here. If you'd like that information, we can certainly provide it after the meeting, but the model does factor that in.
Okay, thank you.
Which that was part of my question, Kevin, was the decertification, does it also assume we would maintain similar levels of TIF in the future? Or does that factor in at all?
It does factor in, that's the 50% commercial and industrial incentivized by.
Assume that stays consistent relative.
Yeah, that essentially half of any of the new value for any commercial industrial properties would be incentivized by some form of tax increment financing. That's a complicated question to answer, primarily because there are different types of TIF districts. Each deal is negotiated in its own right. The terms can be different. The amount of income retained can be different. There are a lot of moving parts in any one of those individual tax increment finance development agreements. But for the purposes of this model, we just assumed that half of the value would be excluded for general taxing purposes.
So we took a very conservative approach to this. I mean, building numbers are pretty low. The assumptions are, 50% tip is a high amount of tip. So again, very conservative, 2% annual base increase, that's pretty conservative. So again, they give more realistic expectations. And again, if this gets updated every so often, those all get updated. So we don't want to get too high or be too aggressive, and then you guys are planning things, and then we don't hit those numbers, and now we have a bigger issue to deal with.
That's exactly right. And ultimately, to Troy's point, if the city is more successful in growing over the 10 years, and there are more homes, there are more multifamily developments, there's more commercial industrial activity than what's modeled here, really that just expands your tax base faster, meaning that the impact to property taxpayers would likely be less because the base would be expanding faster than we currently have modeled for the levy going up, getting back to my point earlier about how you divide one against the other. and it turns out, oh, we've actually had more development, that will ultimately be a good thing for tax impact, over time.
So our goal is to update this every year, to make sure it's updated before we hit the budget, right? Because then this is our best assumptions of what we know and what we're assuming of what we're seeing coming. So I feel like this is why this is so valuable as a tool to start going into this next year's planning, 28, 29, kind of see where we're at. That's all.
Before I made the comment I was gonna make, and Joe just made the comment I was gonna make. So I believe. Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
You should probably get a refund then.
It's tomorrow's tax day.
Okay, so you've seen some of these slides before. This is the 2026 budget. You can generally see that about 60% of your activity in the general fund is supported by property taxes, and about 18% comes from intergovernmental, specifically local government aid. So really between those two revenue sources, about 77% of all the revenue that support your general fund activities comes from two funding sources. The thing I would note here is local government aid specifically, since you have almost one out of every $5 in your general fund supporting those activities. That is a risk for the community. So if the state government were to decide to reduce its local government aid allocation, something you recall going on 10, 15 years ago, then Governor Plenty reduced her allotment power and canceled a bunch of local government aid, and it sends some cities really trying to figure out how to backfill for that intergovernmental aid in their operating budget. I tell you this not to say that it's a good or a bad thing, it's just something that the council should be aware of, that that's a portion of your budget that there is some control that can be exerted at the state level that would have direct and immediate impacts on the financial position of the general fund.
Just a comment on that, and we were up meeting with Sexton and Jazinski a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and the challenge with LGA is it's not keeping up with inflation. And therefore, when it comes to budget time, because it doesn't keep up with inflation, we have to offset that loss with the levy increase. And the push from the CGMC every year is to get that LGA, put some parameters in there so that it does see some growth with costs. It's kind of divided out there. Thankfully, it's more supportive of LGA than not, but as state budgets get tighter, the first thing they always want to pluck at is LGA. So, and I agree with Dan that it's kind of volatile right now, and there isn't a plan B. It's, we look back to around 12 years ago, 14 years ago, when LG was cut in the middle of the year, and that creates, I don't know, were you on councilman when that happened? And creates some extremely challenging times.
There are so few communities in the state that don't get LGA. There are communities that should be able to function without LGA. We are 7 point in the state, only a whole, they give it back to us. Yeah. So my preference of giving back that was to create a budget without it. Because we're at the whims of the state with that. What's our total LGA for last year?
7 million.
7 million, and it's, back then it was 2.5, 3, maybe. I mean, we're becoming increasingly dependent upon the state taking our money and returning it to us. So I don't like that system. It is the way that it is, but there are communities that should be able to function and operate. And I don't like this system. It's much at all.
Just a comment, the mayor and I went up to the League of Minnesota Cities. I can't remember, but it was like a legislative auditor came in, she talked, her assistant came in and talked, and she said, yes, we're gonna have a surplus at the state level, but it's coming from corporate tax and capital gains tax. It's not coming from income tax. And she said, this is happening, so most of what you're talking about, it's happening this. We have more corporate organizations that in the state because of things going on. Capital gains tax, it's pretty good. It's not coming from income. So I would agree with what you're saying. And she just, it's at us. Just a comment.
And then looking at the expenditures, this is a breakdown by function or really kind of just department. This would be very, I think, fairly typical of what we see in other communities in public safety, making up kind of the morality of outlays followed by public works. So this is pretty typical from my experience. I would say that because of how the general fund is constructed, maybe public safety is a little lower on average, but that's also because you do have some golf courses and airports and things like that that are in the general fund. Some cities do sometimes put in other funds. So this would be a little bit what these percentages look like. So when we look at the general fund over time, you can see in the orange, that is the fund balance requirement, the 45% of operating expenditures. And as of 2025, in that budget, you're at about 15.3% of the next year's expenditures, so you are in excess of your policy for that year. For 2026, the fund balance amount does decrease then to being about 47.9% of expenditures, or about $960,000 above the current fund balance requirement. The thing to keep in mind, and you'll note on the slide, is that basically, this is the way the model is set up, is to try to make sure that the unrestricted fund balance, meaning the money that is really available for any public purpose in the general fund, maintains that 45% threshold of next year's operating expenditures. The thing to keep in mind here is that there are no longer in the general fund any quote-unquote excess fund balances. And in fact, when we get into the later years, we actually see the city having to be in a position to levy additional taxes in order to support the fund balance position. So in 2027, you can see we're anticipating about $1,000 in 28, $675,000. And as that goes out over the next 10 years, it ends up being an additional $6.03 million that is needed to support the fund balance position of the community, as noted for the reasons on the previous slide.
So again, just to note, that would be what we would be putting in our budget, annual budgets to keep pace.
Correct. So we have this currently characterized as a contingency, meaning there would be a line item in the budget where you'd be levying a certain amount in order to support your fund balance position over time.
Typically, we haven't had that in our budget. We've crossed our fingers and hoped that we had it.
Repeat that part again. I don't know if I picked this up.
So to make sure I'm saying.
Until I looked at this slide, whenever you sent it to me, I had never seen a general fund budget of 30 million. I think since I've been here, it's been 18, 19, 20, maybe 21.
That's our levy, I believe, is that portion is just the levy portion. And then we have other monies that go into that fund.
Is that the EDA, the HRA, and that? I don't know, we've always just talked about it.
Right there, you've got the 18.4 property tax levy.
So you get 7 million from this LGA. So that, you add that 19 and you add 7, and then you put some fees and smaller pieces in there.
When I go and look at my file, I'll bet I'll never see a general fund budget that high. From 21, 22, 23.
Because we've only usually talked about the levy a lot. I mean, we always are talking about the levy, how much the levy's going up.
We were in the
Levy
high
is
20s for total general fund expenditures. But yeah, we do highlight the levy amount.
So just remember, Dan, the levy is the property tax.
Yes.
So that's what we spend so much because that's what's impacting, that's what you're raising. So we're looking at all those other revenue streams coming in too. Plus that, Jody, if you wanna.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, that's exactly right. So the general fund is a balanced budget. What they're looking at, that 31 million is the expenditure part. The 18 million is exactly what John's talking about. It's the property taxes that help support those expenses. But there's other revenue sources beyond that 18 million that also help support that $31 million. budget is the $31 million.
But generally speaking, we lowered our reserve requirement to 45%. Generally speaking, over time, that has always built. There's never been a year all where we've been significantly under, and we've had to correct from that. Typically, we've grown to 50, 55, 58%. And we've bought down the levy or utilized those monies for one-time expenditure. So historically, we usually build that up. We haven't experienced a shortfall that I can recall with our fund balance requirement.
We've stayed above that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Mayor and Council, and maybe Dan's going to talk about this too, that is one of the options to, the state auditor's requirement is below that. So you can reduce that policy at some point if you don't want to continue putting in the additional funds to meet that. You can reduce it to like 40%. That's something that cities have considered, but Dan, I don't know if you're recommending that. I haven't seen the plan right now.
It's a good point. So there are basically two benchmarks that you can use for general fund. There's the Government Finance Officers Association, which generally says between 40 and 50%, and then the Office of the State Auditor recommends 5 months, so it works out to about 42%, and you're at 45%. So you could certainly, let's say, adopt a range rather than a very fast percentage, and then understand that you may float a little in that range, and that's generally okay. We do see that cities that adopt a range do still have a target, so they might say 40 to 50%, but the target's 45%. And that's for two reasons. One, so they don't necessarily start to approach that lower limit over time and then have to make a larger correction. And two, it gives clear direction to staff about how to consider the property tax levy, since that is principally the funding sources for general funds. But you could fiddle with it if you wanted to Joe's point. But 45%, I would also say, is not an uncommon percentage, probably the most common we see.
But Dan, to your slide, if we reduce that, we're still gonna have issues going forward, but we have to do something. Is that correct?
That would be correct. It would certainly help. We'd have to change the fund balance requirement and adjust the plan to see what the numbers were over time, but it would solve for some of the issue. The other thing I would stress here is we are currently relying on 2025 budget and 2026 budget numbers, and to the point that was made earlier, the current unaudited estimate, I think, is just under $2 million. So once we have the final audited number, we could update the plan, you would see some of those bars change. And some of this additional contingency in the future would probably go away, understanding we may be managing by spending some of that fund balance over the next few years. But the thing I would stress in that situation is that those balances wouldn't really be available for other purposes or activities. It would be there mainly to manage the financial position of the organization and the property tax levy.
Dropping from, we've always tried to be above 45. But if we were to drop to 42, would that negatively impact our bond rating?
Not necessarily, primarily because you're gonna be compared with peers and they will look at total liquidity, but in the overall metrics for your credit rating, the difference in liquidity between 42 and 45% would likely not have a meaningful impact.
Okay.
The thing that the credit rating agencies in that regard are probably maybe a little more concerned about is that you're just following the fund balance policy and that you're doing anything that you said. They tend to bristle if they see that you set a 42 or a 45%, or the example would be, and this is not the case here, but we have communities where this happens, they set 45, they can't maintain 45, and they drop to 42, and the credit rating agency would be like, well, you really weren't following your policy, you kind of just changed it to make life easier for you. That's not something that, it's received okay, but it does raise some eyebrows from the credit rating agency. So when we look at some other special tax and debt levies, we won't go through these in great detail, but you do have levies for your capital project funds, EDA and HRA. They total about $716,000 in 2026. We'll talk about this in more detail when we get into some of the specific funds, but we are planning increases to the capital project and building maintenance levy. And that's for two reasons. One, the CIP has been updated, so there is some cost pressures that exist in those funds. And then additionally,
there is some debt that will be needed to support the current planned activities. And one of the ways that we can mitigate that pressure is to try to put more money into the fund so you don't have to borrow as much over time. And so we'll talk about that in just a few slides. Your debt service, there's currently 12 outstanding debt service levies, so we have individual bonds the city has to pay back over time. They're about $2.4 million in 2026. This is a portion of the levy that once you issue the debt and certify and register the bonds, you basically have kind of no real control over this levy because you're obligated to make these payments since you attach your full faith and credit. In fact, under Minnesota state law, if you didn't make these levies, the county would actually come in and levy on your behalf to make sure that you're making your debt service payments. But we do like to talk about them because there are opportunities where we can maneuver around the edges, and we've done that in this plan, where basically we look at those individual debt service funds, and if there is cash available, we will use that cash to reduce the levy in those years rather than levying for the full amount. So if you do have some money left in those funds, rather than levying for 100 or 105% as required by law, you can actually use some of that money and pay a portion of your debt service in cash. So you just have to tell the county that you're doing that instead of levying for that.
Dan, of those 12, are most of them the street bond things?
Yes.
All of them?
No, they're all.
Yes.
I have to go back to one, but I think so. I don't think there are any equipment certificates. There's a, I take that back, there's one of the bonds has a small portion that has a small CIP portion for a building. I can't remember what the project was.
It might have been this space right here.
It could have been, yeah.
So they're pretty necessary. We gotta fix the streets.
Yes. Yeah.
Sean needs money.
And for a city of your size, with a levy of your size, 2.4 million annually is totally normal. We see that. The one thing,
Sorry, I think on the flip side of that, we had, Dan and I had this conversation about buying down debt service and one or the other, large projects versus small projects. I think the thing to note in that was, we weren't doing either. Like, yes, you bond for big projects, you pay them off over time, because you spread out the benefit and the payers. But I think we probably have had smaller projects that we could have utilized the funding, but we never did. Like, we just bond for all of them.
But we didn't know if we had any.
Correct. It was, and we didn't have as good of a picture of what was available. So I think there probably will be opportunities for you to utilize more dollars.
We can call Jody and ask.
Right. Without borrowing, without bonding for it. Hopefully that ends up being the case, but you can tell me
well,
if we
in
actually.
some situations that may be the case. The current CIP of the city is quite robust, and so we are planning additional debt in the CIP and building funds. This question was asked earlier, are there any uncommitted monies? There in fact are. There are about $3 million in uncommitted reserves. As noted on the slide, there's about $2.1 million in the closed debt service fund. And then across the other inactive debt service funds, there's about another $1.3 million. One of those funds does have a deficit in it though, and would have to be settled by some of the other debt service funds of about negative $400,000. So you add all that together, kind of rolling around those various closed and inactive debt service funds, there's about $3 million that could be used for other purposes. So you could apply it to capital projects, you could use it for property tax relief, you could use it to backfill some of the contingency that we mentioned in the general fund. It is essentially available for any public purpose of the city. So that might be something to talk about as part of your budget development process, and consider ways that those could be best deployed. My personal recommendation is that given the challenges that we're seeing in the general fund, I'd like to just collapse into the general fund to solve the rapid debt for money in the future. But we can definitely consider what would happen if we were to modify the fund balance requirement to eventually further. So we look at the individual debt service funds. There are some bonding that is planned in 2027, $65 million for the public safety facilities. I would mention, as you know, that the city has received a reverse referendum petition, and that will likely go to referendum later this year, which you may or may not pass, but for the purposes of financial planning, you've probably heard us say this a few times, we like to be conservative, so we included it, assuming that it would move forward. And then in 2030, there's about $6 million for city hall improvements, and in 2031, about $12.5 million for our maintenance facility. These figures, the $6 million and the 12.5, those are inflated to those years based on the information provided by the city. So you can see right now, beginning beginning in 27, there'd be an additional debt levy of about $375,000 based on the current capital project complement, and that increases to about $17.4 million by 2035. A good portion of that, of course, would be the $65 million public safety facilities. And so over the next 10 years, we're really seeing about $182 million of debt contemplated by the CIP. The thing that I would note, it's important for the council to know, is that based on the current analysis and the updated CIP, the city will start to approach certain debt limits and will need to actively manage its capital plan accordingly. The thing to keep in mind, and this is not an uncommon thing that we see with cities, especially looking out over a 10-year period, we know that some of these projects will happen, some of them won't happen, some of them will occur in years that were planned, some of them will occur in years that we weren't planned. And so we do just like to note it as something that the council should be aware of, because ultimately you don't have the legal authority to borrow money in excess of your statutory debt limits. And it'll be something that will have to be actively managed over the next 10 years or so. And probably another reason to Jen's point to update the plan on a regular basis to monitor how the CIP interacts with your plans, and then of course your needs, and then the benefits. So when looking out over the next couple of years, these are some of the major capital costs for the city. I would note these are city costs only. So you can see the interior pool surfaces, the capital projects related to Main, Broadway, and 18th Streets. There's also a stormwater component to that. The public safety facilities, which we've talked about, some more streets in 2027, and then we do have some more costly vehicle replacements, particularly a fire engine in 2027, and then some additional stormwater projects in 2027. The thing I would mention when you look at that public safety number, that is a number that Ellers has adjusted the cost of the project by, assuming that it would take another year, so we applied an estimated annual inflation pending that reverse referendum and possible referendum of the community. This has not come from the architects or engineers. I imagine they would have an opinion if the project were to be delayed and what that would look like, and they would furnish you with the cost. But again, for the purposes of our planning, we did estimate something, not quite knowing how that was gonna unfold over the next few months. So I just wanna make that very clear, because I know there is some sensitivity about the cost of the project, what does it mean, some numbers are bandied around here and there. This is just an estimate that we included for financial planning purposes, much like we would for any capital project that was pushed out another year, we apply it another year. So looking at the capital project fund themselves, over the next decade, $186 million in capital projects, so almost $20 million bucks a year currently planned. That is supported primarily by bond issuance. $36.7 million related to the annual street projects, and then $68 million, as you know, for the safety facilities, excuse me. Property tax levy at this point in time, as the council may recall, it was reduced in 2026 to about $249,000. We're actually recommending as part of this plan that it increases to $600,000, and it increases annually until 2035 up to $1 million. And that's primarily to pay for smaller capital projects that are better candidates to be cash financed rather than borrowing the money for shorter term, less costly projects that possibly have shorter useful lives. The thing to keep in mind, we did establish a fund balance goal for this fund. This is not particularly a city policy, but we do like to look at it. For capital project funds, and to use a technical finance term, they tend to be bumpy. You have, larger capital projects in one year, you may spend several $1 million, and the following year spend only $100,000, and then the following year $1 million. And so we like to smooth that out by using a 5-year average, and then we take 35% of that 5-year average. So that's what that orange line is. And essentially what we like to see over time is that ending fund balances, those blue bars, are generally above that orange line. And that's how we solve for the financial needs of the fund. So we look at how much money should you have in the fund in any given year, and then what is the capital activity and revenue sources available to that fund. And then we figure out how to make the whole thing work, either based on using debt or potentially property taxes, or in the case of this particular fund, both. The one thing I would note though is that we, for fund balance purposes, we did exclude the public safety facility because it did tend to skew what those numbers would look like using the property tax because it's so large. But generally what you can see is that right now, if this were to happen, and the city were to spend this amount of money and issue the amount of debt with the provided before, about having to actively monitor the debt limits over time, you can see that it generally performs well with those adjustments. Of course, the council can always take the decision to not do some of these capital projects, and then we would have to adjust the management. One thing I should mention, when we look at these individual funds, Ellers really makes no opinion about whether or not you should do the capital projects. We take the cue from council and staff, like reaching back to my earlier slide, looking at your plans, and then we figure out the revenue requirements to meet that plan. If you're uncomfortable with these revenue requirements, meaning you don't want the additional levy or the amount of debt, or you're not interested in certain capital projects, you can certainly amend those plans and we can update the FMP accordingly. But it's not our position to opine on whether or not you should do a particular street project or a particular building project. That's really up to the elected officials, of course, and they're relying on staff and other consultants.
Would this be a good time to ask when we can expect solid numbers on our safety center?
Well, until it goes up to bid, Dan, we won't know what the actual numbers are. But right now,
When is that gonna happen?
well, yeah, you have to wait till a reverse referendum has been filed, so we'd have to wait for after that. So we wouldn't know if we have to have a source to pay for it if we put it out to bid.
Well, when we approved funding up to such and such a 65 million, then that would signal that we have funding in place, so we could go and get bids.
So the process would go as we have an engineer estimate. And that's that engineer estimate that we've been working on, right? And then, and so then that's 61.5, I believe is what we have. We allowed or authorized up to 65 million. So what would happen next is continue the work with finalizing the documents or the construction documents, and then authorize staff to go out for bid. And that's when we put it out to the market to say, somebody bid on this project, we bid on it, and then that's when we have the number. And then the council would say, we authorize the bid, or we accept the bid, and then move forward with the construction. But we can't get to that step because we have to have a funding source. Our funding source was the general obligation funding, using that tool. And that is subject to a reverse referendum, which has been filed. So we can't get to that next step now to really test it. What Dan is providing in here is the top number of 65 million. He's saying probably a year later, right? So you better add the, for planning purposes, you better add the 3% or 4% to that 65 million, so you can have the right number in the plan.
How can we give a proper estimate to our taxpayers to vote on something if we ourselves don't know what it is? We're just asking them to trust us that it's gonna be 65 million when we're, you know, I don't know how many times I've been assured that the process of right sizing this, what can we do without if that's too much money? When do we get to do that?
So,
When we can look at this?
so we have been looking at it. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago that said, you know, what would we wanna take off to trim it here or there? With that is, we're at 61. That is the number that we're at, with what the need is. Unless we make some substantial change in design, or make substantial change in not building it to what we need, that is what the estimated number is. The only way that we can truly get the right number is to have it go out to bid. But right now, just like when Sean says, I got an estimate, you know, engineer estimate to do a street, the bids might come higher or lower than that, but we're just putting together that engineer estimate.
Right, and at this point, the language in the referendum has to reflect what the resolution stated was authorization of $65 million. Up to. So we can decide we're gonna spend $50 million, but the referendum will still have to reauthorize the city to spend that amount.
It's true, but if we don't go out with an accurate estimate, that in my opinion is right size, we're gonna end up with nothing.
Well, that's a conversation.
So, do we want something or nothing? Something might not be perfect and ideal, exactly what we want, but nothing's even worse. So So if we go out for approval up to 65 million, the constituents are going, well, up to 6, they don't have an alternative. It's either 61.5 or nothing. I'm afraid we're getting nothing. Just in the scuttlebutt that I've heard and the people that I talked to, there isn't anyone that disagrees we need to do something. But there's almost a unanimous consent that 65 is too much. Unless we go up there with an option. And I'm saying, when can we talk about that? When do we have to decide is nothing is better than something? When can we get together? You know, because right now, the public is gonna view this as all public knowledge and say, yeah, they're just going in with 65 million. I wanna look at alternatives to where we can go in and get something done. Again, it might not be ideal what we want. We don't wanna stay where we're at. We can't stay where we're at. So when is that discussion? And by the way, I thought Chris was rather flippant at that last meeting, Chris from ICS, when I said, what, you know, when do we, you know, he's one of them that always said, we're gonna right size this, or we can look at this, or whatever, give and take. I thought he was rather flippant when I asked him about it, and he said, what do you want to cut out? I'm just a knucklehead, how would I know what the chief would want to cut out? Or the chief, second in command chief would want to cut out? And, you know, I don't know that to tell him that. But I really think this has gotten to be a little bit of a railroad job to where we gotta be able to tell our constituents exactly what we're thinking. If we can't provide an alternative, I'm afraid we're getting nothing.
So Dan, a couple of things. One, we've been working on this for several years. Many people have been working on it, including you and many people on this council. We've rolled up our sleeves. We've tried this, we've tried that. This is Plan B. This is Plan C.
Okay.
But if I can just continue with this for a second here, give me a second here. So just like Dan can only give us a financial management plan of what we put in and what number we have. Chris from ICS can only design a building for what we put in and we say it. It's not Chris telling us what we need. It's our fire staff, it's our police chief, it's them, it's us saying, this is what we need in this building. This is what Owatonna needs. Now if Burnville or Lake Meadow looked at theirs, but this is what we need to do, to run a police station. We need the salvages, we need the victim rooms, we need those decontamination spaces, we need the living quarters. That's what we need to run Owatonna's police department. So Chris is not telling us, hey, you should add this, you should add that. He's just doing whatever we tell him to do. So how do we right size it? So in some ways, he is telling us, well, what do you want out? Do you not want a 75 or 100-year building? We can build you, I forgot what they're called, I'll just call it a pole ship. Then he'll design that for us. So he's only doing what we're asking him to do. But we've asked him to design as a building for multi-generations. Just like we have down at the current one, that's 118 years old. We got 118 years out of that building. So if we don't want that type of, that construction, then we do need to tell Chris, design it for this. But then we're only gonna get probably 25, 30 years out. So this is where I think the mayor and a few people have said, we need to decide what we need to do, so staff has the direction on what we need to do. If we don't want this type of a building, then council needs to give direction to me to say, Jenna, design it a different way. But what I've been hearing from council is, we need a police, we need a fire, we don't have any more time left, kick the can long enough. So we as a team need to come together and say, this is our project, and this is the only project that we have going forward. And right now, today, it's $61 million.
But what I've also heard from ICS and staff is there will be time to discuss this. And if it comes in way too much, then we can scramble.
So that's the bidding component, and that's what Doug says, is if I would get a chance to get it to bid, then we could say, well, we can't afford that, or we won't do this, but we didn't get it to bid.
Without a second proposal.
So you're saying we should have a plan B?
Without a second
We don't have a
proposal.
plan B, we don't have a plan B. mean, just
How
being
much
honest.
longer can you live there, chief? How much longer can you live there? And we're overdue already. And I think it's stupid. I'm sorry, my opinion is that's too much money and it's not gonna pass. That's my opinion. So then my question is, gonna be all the people that vote no, what's your plan? And they look at me just like I felt with Chris. I said, well, we're not, I mean, so we don't know, we know that's too much money. We're not gonna pass that. Then what do we do? Then, what? Appointment A?
Well, I think the hardest part about this at this point is we are gonna have to be very proactive in, there again, if we know it's $61 million, demonstrating why it makes sense for us to spend the amount of money. And I agree with you, Dan, it's a lot of money, I would rather not spend that much money. We have to do something, we definitely do something. But if we go into it at this number, you might be right, they might fail. So the only other thing we could do is come at it and say, okay, we think we've created a scenario, we can do this for $55 million. And we have to tell the constituents, you're voting on this resolution for $65 million, but we are telling you, we think we can do it for $55 million. They'll have to vote for 65.
Wishes and, you know, if, wishes were horses, beggars would ride, right? We tell our constituents that we can do better, and they're going, you ain't doing better. We know government, you ain't doing better. And that's what's out there right now. You know, I just think that we have to have something else to offer us, just like when we go for a sales tax to help support the community center. Better have 2 or 3 on that list so that they can vote no on 1 or 2. Right, if you go with 1 item for whatever the community center is gonna cost. Our consultant said it's not gonna go, you better have 2 or 3 things for them to vote on, because they want to vote no on something. And I don't know, I might be an outlier on the council, but I would sure like to have a meeting amongst us and whoever else wants to be there. Exactly the way forward.
Reverse referendum doesn't give option A, B, and C.
But if we can come out with the public and say, we've already come out and said 61 million. So why can't we come out with saying, hey, we're cutting back and we're only gonna be 40 million?
And I will add to that, Dan, I had that conversation with some of the people getting the petition, and I said, how much would be the correct amount? And I was told, well, the amount of money you wanna spend might be right. That might be the amount of money we should spend. They simply want it demonstrated to them more clearly that it makes sense. So they have told me that even the amount of money we're asking, which I agree with you with, is a lot, and I would like it to be less. They've said that might be the right amount of money. So it's on us a little bit to just demonstrate that that is the appropriate amount of money for what we need. Because they have told me that that could be the right amount, they just want to demonstrate it a little more clearly. So
I agree. And I think as a council, we need to, if we're committed to this, we need to sell it. But I wouldn't expect Jen to go out with the flag and we're sent back to going, go for it. I mean, I understand it's expensive, but if I were looking at something.
It's not the money might be right, and we might be able to explain it to them. But are the majority of people gonna vote for it?
Well, again, I think that's what.
That's my question. We need to do something. Is the majority going to vote? Well, right now, what I'm saying, what I'm hearing is no.
So we got a lot of, the reverse referendums out there. And whether we do it in August or November, that's gonna be the deal. And I would hate to go, okay, it's $40 million, and we're going, it's a 15-year building for you, and it's a 10-year building for you. And somebody's gonna come back just like Dan has done and said, wait 1 year, you're adding another $3 million. And why would we do that? I look at it just like at the high school. They kicked the can down the road, and they built the pods, and they threw good money after bad to extend that building for what, 2-3 years? I was involved in the design of the windows, and we told them up front, this is not gonna work.
But look back at why that happened. We needed the space, we needed to do something. We picked that to do something. They could not do anything. If they had voted for it, if they'd asked the citizens to vote for a new high school 15 years ago, it would have made it. So you chose something because what they had was not adequate. And that's what I'm saying, we may have to do something, even though you and I know that it's a fool's errand, but something is better than nothing.
And I hear what you're saying, and again, I think that meeting is respectfully disagree. I'm not going to throw good money after bad, but we're throwing something in that's gonna last us 10 or 15 years. And then go, I understand that the people in Watertown may go to town. I was on the school board when they voted down the high school 3 times. Finally ended up getting it, but I think the need is there. I think the requirements are needed, and I'm gonna acquiesce to Nate.
So you mentioned the school district, and I'm gonna say that hurt them. I was in the high school when the big renovation happened. That was not meant to be a short-term solution. That was sold as a long-term solution for the high school. And then 10 years later, we're looking for a new school. I mean, if we demonstrate this is a long-term plan, it makes way more sense. There's definitely a bad taste in mouths because of that. I mean, there was a proposal to offload the old school before the bond was even paid off. So people were like, well, this was long-term. It lasted 10 years, and we're back asking again. So I think we really have to do a good job of demonstrating that. We don't want to be in this situation again, where a bunch of money was spent in a facility as a long-term solution and ended up being a short-term solution.
Being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, I mean, does not mean spending as little money as possible.
Right.
It's spending responsibly, and I get what you're doing, and I absolutely get what you're doing. But we don't know what the result of the rehearsal are the voices saying no the strongest? Yes. But there's a whole lot of people that will probably not do it. We don't know what the result is.
I agree.
And a lot of people that signed that petition have gone and said that they didn't sign it because they're against it. They signed it because they just wanted to have a voice in it, and they wanted it to go to a vote. So we don't know what the result is. We can't.
Which I don't like that the newspaper said petitioners are saying no.
Right.
That's not necessarily what that means. Just because you signed it doesn't mean you're against it.
Right.
So there's some nuance.
You're a referendum. It's a grassroots democracy. I just know we need to do something, and I don't want to price ourselves out.
Either do we again, and you've been on these committees, you've been in there, and we are doing our best to keep the costs down, be reasonable. That's why we're reusing our city land, right? I mean, like, we have made some real decisions to keep that cost down.
I agree with everything. I agree with everything everyone is saying.
And I need you to
It's
please
just
share
a
your.
caveat.
And that's where, I respectfully disagree with you, Dan. We toured these facilities and we put our faith in Chief Mondale and his staff, and Chief Hoffman and his staff. How we rate sizes for OTAN. What we have in place is what they feel is right size for OTAN. They're the experts. And I have to put my faith and trust that with their expert opinion, that's what they believe, what we need for today and for the future.
I concur with Kevin. Nobody wants to work in a space that is, going to use, not a great environment, I don't want to say hazardous, but we need to take that into consideration. I should have, I spent a little bit of time, not in the jail. But that environment is very difficult for the officer at best. And how do we expect our employees, which we value, we go through all these things, and then we put them in a workspace that is substandard? I mean, that to me is not a very good way for the council to act. Again, I understand, it's a lot of money, but what is it? I do have to comment on one thing, Jenna did an interview with one of the TV stations from the cities, and we said 65 million. Oh, that's one station. No, that's both. And we went, really? certain way. Again, I was on the school board and we went out 3 times with it, and we finally got it. And I think it was because of me, I got off and it passed. Maybe I gotta get off and you guys can pass, but I think in order for us to walk the talk, we need to do this. And go out, how much more, yes or no vote, we move forward, but how can we look at these people in front of us and go, we're committed to you if we don't do this? And I'll get my way 10 bucks.
So one of our values is, I think it's pride in our word, and it says, if it's worth doing, let's do it right. I don't think this project has, I mean, that is one of the core is to get to this. If it's worth doing, Dan, let's do it right.
And I wrote down on, that, survey about I promised to stand in unity, said, after some discussion like what we just had.
Yeah, we had it on March 19th, we had good discussion there at our retreat, of how committed we were to the police and fire stations. Number one of our focus for the next 3 years, and the civility test was to that, saying we're gonna agree to something, we can have our difference of opinions, but when we agree to, say, $65 million going forward, we're committed to doing that as a team, I think is what I heard from you.
Were you up?
I was just gonna add, the public in general, they want good services, police and fire, of course, city services. Now, what I will say is, if Jeff tells me this design, this is what we need, I trust Jeff. You know, if the fire department says this is what we need, I trust the fire department. Do I trust the consultants as much? I do not. We have had consultants in the past, we have had projects go, and we get it all done and go, this is what they do, how did this not function properly? So, I trust our local staff, that if they tell us what we've designed is what we need, great. If someone else from the outside is telling us this is what we need, I'm gonna be a little more skeptical. So if you guys tell me, you know what, this is the thing they put in, we could do without it, I'm like, great. And if you say, you know what, it's designed exactly the way we need it, I'm gonna support you. But I do want you guys to be the ones determining that. I don't want an outside consulting firm or an architect or somebody else telling us, this is what we think you need. Because I don't trust that nearly as much.
That's why we purposely put staff teams on this. Chief, you wanna comment on it? I mean, you've been involved since day one.
Right, so this isn't, when I came into this design, it wasn't that I said, we need a 55,000 square foot building. I didn't know what the scope was gonna be. All we did is we worked with our consultants, and then the engineers and the architects, and we went on our tours. It's like, we're operating out of a commercial bank building. If we wanna operate out of a police station and function like a police department, these are the things that we need. And then the tours kind of reflected on that, and it helped shape our consultants. And then they delivered this package with the design features that we need. And so then it ended up being 55,000 square feet. Now, if we start trimming back on this, I would say we're gonna be asking to remodel, add on in, what is it, 10, 15, 20 years? So I think, if you're looking for an opinion, I think this is scoped for the future. We're not looking to try to add on to this thing for the future. It's scoped, and it has the necessary programming needs that we need to function. So, I didn't know that it was gonna end up to be 55,000 square feet. You know, but that's what it is, and then to Councilmember Dodson's point, I need to then trust the consultants and the design architects.
And like I said, if you are exercising a level of scrutiny with them, because they have a vested interest in, you know, they get paid a percentage. So, but if you look at it and you're comfortable with it, I trust you guys and what you need. And, but if there's opportunities, great. If there's not, I'm okay with that. But I don't want it to be one of those situations where down the road, you're having to ask again. I'd like to do it right the first time. I just want to ensure that doing it right is what we're doing.
My turn now?
Your turn.
Dan doesn't even get to talk, this is his time. He's gonna listen.
I hear a few things, a couple of things I want to reiterate. I think Nate was talking about a lot of people sign that petition because they want to have a say in what happens. I think that's great. I think we should embrace that. And I think that gives us 6 months to explain to people why this is a good, well thought out plan. It's a good investment for the future. And throwing it down to your kids and your grandkids 20 years from now is not a good plan. In fact, it got thrown down to us from 20 and 30 years ago, and somebody's gonna have to step up to it and do it. So the referendum's great. Now we'll get into it for the entire town, and I think as a group, we should embrace that and say, you know what? We got an excellent plan, here's why, and do our best to get a yes vote. And I think everybody here plays a role in it, and it's a great plan. I've been involved with it for 4 years, probably. And the fact that we can get the entire community to vote on it and hopefully say yes is even better to me. So, that's it.
I'm hungry.
And can we take a break? Is this okay to take a break? And we can maybe come back with our theme.
Maybe the dance gonna be done shortly.
You think I'm gonna stay between them and lunch?
I would rather it's not having a working lunch, because we've got staff that has to reply to emails, they've got to
Got
make
it.
phone calls, and so I think we owe it to them to do their business.
Because
We
Dan,
kind
you
of
have
promised
still a
them
little
that
bit
you'd
left.
have time to do
Yes.
your business, so.
I think we better get Burbank. Let's go. Should we say 25 minutes?
Do business Tuesday.
125. 125.
No limit for what?
Dan, I'm not far behind you.